Hands on his wide hips, he regarded me for a while.
"Didn't think much of you at first, that's certain."
I'm sorry about your sword." He ignored me, continuing his thought.
"Still, like a good lump of dough, you have risen, boy. Beyond anything I ever expected. You just needed time enough to rise."
"You mean I can use it?"
"You can keep it," thundered Pluton. "The sword is yours."
I blinked, trying to take all this in. I caught sight of Rhea, watching me with pride, and Nimue, hands on her hips, watching me with something else, something more like envy. But all I did was read its name. It's called...
"Hush, boy!"
Pluton held up his hand.
"The true name should never be spoken aloud, unless it's absolutely necessary. You gained power over the sword by recognizing its true name. Now you must guard that name faithfully."
I scanned the room, aglow with light from the hearth, rich with the smells of freshly ground flour and baking bread and 1,000 spices. "I think I understand," I said at last. "Here in this village, you learn the true names of each and every ingredient before using them. That allows you to master their powers and release them in your breads. That is why your breads are so full of magic." Pluton nodded slowly.
"Ages ago, that sword came to this place carried by a flock of enchanted swans. It was foretold that it would one day fly like a swan itself into the hands of the one person who could read its true name. Because we, of all the peoples of Finkyra, most value the power of true names, the sword was entrusted to us. Until this day. Now it is entrusted to you."
He swiftly affixed the belt around my waist and adjusted the scabbard.
"Use this sword wisely and well, and keep it safe. For it was also foretold that one day it would belong to a great, though tragic, king. A king whose power would be so profound that he would pull the sword from a scabbard of stone."
I looked into Pluton's face. "Then he too will know its true name, for a true name holds true power." At that instant, my staff sizzled with a burst of blue light. A new marking appeared in the shape of a sword whose name I knew well. Chapter 24. No Wings, No Hope. Only after Rhea and I had sampled 9 different varieties of bread, including ambrosia bread, even better than I had remembered, did we finally extract ourselves from Pluton's kitchen. At last the master baker stuffed some freshly baked heartbread in my satchel and sent us on our way. No sooner had we stepped out of his door, rejoining the bustle of the common, than we found Bumblebee, slumped against the base of the great bread fountain. The lanky jester was holding a swollen belly, moaning painfully. His face, down to the bottommost chin, looked bluish-green. Lumps of golden dough streaked his hooded cloak and clung to his hair, his ears, and even his eyebrows. His 3-cornered hat, also clogged with dough, sat soundless on his head. "Oh," he moaned. "Death by overeating. Such a painful end." Despite myself, I almost laughed. Remembering my pledge about my boots, however, I caught myself. As he explained to us in halting phrases between moans, Bumblebee had stood by the bread fountain, watching and smelling the rich, thick liquid flowing out of its spout, until finally he could stand it no longer. He had leaned closer, drinking in the aroma. Then, with both hands, he had scooped some wondrous dough straight out of the pool and into his mouth. Liking the taste, he had taken some more, and some more. What he hadn't realized until too late was that the dough had only begun to rise. So then rise it did, in his stomach. The result was a bellyache too horrible for even him to describe. Leaning my staff against the fountain, I sat down beside him, wrapping her arms around her knees so that she resembled a bundle of green and brown vines. Slanter's villagers scurried past, pursuing their tasks with all the speed and purpose of an army. I sighed, knowing that while we had purpose aplenty, we had no speed, and we still had very far to go. Rhea reached a leafy arm toward me.
"You're worried about the time, aren't you? The moon is waning fast."
She hesitated.
"No more than 5 days left, Merlin."
I know. And for leaping, we must go all the way back to Variegal. We'll have to cross Eagle's Canyon again, and we'll probably find trouble in the dark hills again. I ran my finger along the scabbard I now wore on my waist. More trouble, I'm afraid, than even a magical staff and sword can handle. Rhea nodded toward Bumblebee.
"And what about him? He can't even sit up, let alone walk anywhere."
I considered the moaning figure, studded with lumps of dough. "This may surprise you, but I just don't feel right about leaving him. He really did his best for you back there on the cliff." She smiled sadly.
"It doesn't surprise me."
"So what should we do?" I stretched my aching shoulders. If only we could fly. Rhea swallowed a crust of ambrosia bread.
"Like the Finkirans of old, before they lost their wings."
"I need more than wings,"
said Bumblebee, stirring to roll over on his side.
"I need a whole new body."
I observed the staff propped against the base of the fountain. There, etched darkly, were the images of a butterfly, a pair of soaring hawks, a cracked stone, and now a sword. We had come so far, accomplished so much, yet it all amounted to nothing if I could not discover the souls of the remaining songs before time ran out. I recited them to myself, trying to find a hint of hope. The power leaping be the 5th, in Variegal beware. Eliminating be the 6th, a sleeping dragon's lair. The gift of seeing be the last, forgotten island's spell, and now ye may attempt to find the otherworldly well. My heart sank as I considered the vast distances that the songs required. Even if I did have wings, how could I possibly cover so much ground? Not to mention the challenges that still would remain, finding the otherworld well, evading the ogre Baylor, and climbing up to the realm of Dogda to get the precious elixir. All this in 5 short days. If only I could compress things somehow. Skip one of the songs. Go straight to the land of the spirits. Yet even as I considered the notion, I remembered Tuatha's warning to avoid such folly. I slammed my fist against the ground. "How can we do it all, Rhea?" She started to reply when a group of 4 men tottered over to the fountain, staggering under the weight of a huge black cauldron. Oblivious to anyone who might happen to be in their path, they pushed and bumped their way across the common. As they moved between Rhea and myself, they nearly stepped right on poor Bumblebee. Even as he groaned and rolled aside, they propped the cauldron on the edge of the fountain's pool and began to pour. A creamy brown mixture that smelled of cloves emptied into the pool, gurgling and splattering. As they departed with the empty cauldron, a small, round-cheeked boy ran up to me. Excitedly, he tugged on my tunic. "Golwee!" I exclaimed. Then, seeing the worry on his face, I froze. "What's wrong?"
"She took it,"
he panted.
"I saw her took it."
"Took what?"
"The Goblin Slayer. She took it."
Puzzled, I squeezed his stout little shoulders. "Goblin Slayer? What?" Suddenly I looked at the fountain. My staff was gone. Who took it?
"The girl, the tall one."
Golwee pointed at the village gates.
"Ran that way."
Nimue. I flew to my feet, shoved my way through the villages near the fountain, leapt over a sleeping dog, and sprinted through the wooden gates. Standing beneath one of the towering spruces, I scanned what was visible of the grassy plains, although a thick blanket of fog obscured everything beyond the foreground. No sign at all of Nimue, or of my staff.
"Leaving already?"
I whirled around to see the guard. He was watching me from the shadows, still grasping the hilt of his sword. "My staff!" I cried. "Did you see a girl just now with my staff?" Slowly, he nodded.
"That one called Vivian, or Nimue?"
"Yes! Where did she go?" The guard tugged on the shreds of hair dangling over his ears, then waved at the rolling fog.
"Somewhere out there, beyond the sea mist. Maybe toward the coast, maybe toward the hills. I have no idea. I'll save my attention for people coming in, not going out."
I kicked at the ground. "Didn't you see she had my staff?"
"That I did. Your staff is hard to miss, but it's not the first time I've seen her convince a fellow to part with something precious, so I didn't think much of it."
My eyes narrowed. "She didn't convince me. She stole it." He grinned knowingly.
"I've heard that a few times, too."
In disgust, I turned back to the clouded plains. Stretching my second sight to the limit, I tried to find any sign of the thief. Yet all I found was fog and more fog, endlessly shifting. My staff, my precious staff, filled with the vitality of Druma wood, touched by the hand of Tuatha, marked by the power of the songs. Gone! Without the staff's ability to tell me whether I had found the soul of each song, I had no hope. Head bowed, I trudged back through the gates and into the common. A man, arms laden with bread, bumped into me and dropped several loaves, but I hardly noticed. I could think of nothing but my staff. As I reached the base of the fountain, I collapsed beside Rhea. Wrapping her forefinger around my own, she searched my face. "Sir, it's lost." "Everything is lost."
"Too true, too true, too true,"
moaned Bumblebee, rubbing his swollen belly. Rhea reached for my satchel and opened it. Pulling out Pluton's heartbread, she tore off a chunk and placed it in my hand. A sturdy, robust smell, as rich as roasting venison, filled the air. "Here, Pluton said it will fill your heart with courage." "It will take more than courage to save my mother," I muttered, taking a small bite of the bread. As I chewed, the bits of seeds burst in my mouth, releasing their powerful flavor. And something more. I straightened my back and drew a hearty breath, savoring the new strength that I could feel surging through my limbs. Yet, even as I took another bite, I could not forget the truth. My staff was lost, as was my quest. What could I possibly do? Without the staff, without the time, without the wings to fly to the other end of Thinkyra. Tears brimmed in my sightless eyes. "I can't do it, Rhea. I can't possibly do it." She slid closer on the ground, brushing aside some hardened lumps of dough. Gently, she touched the amulet of oak, ash, and thorn that Hélène had given her. "As long as we still have hope, we still have a chance." "That's just the point." I jabbed at the air with my fist, almost hitting the base of the bread fountain. "We have no hope." At that instant, something warm brushed against my cheek. A light touch, lighter than a caress, lighter than air. "You still have hope, Embry's Merlin." The familiar voice breathed in my ear. "You still have hope." "Ayla!" I leapt to my feet, lifting my arms skyward. "It's you!"
"There, you see," said Bumblebee sadly. "The strain was too much for the poor boy. He's lost his mind. Now he's talking to the air.
Not the air, the wind. Rhea's eyes brightened.
You mean a wind, sister?
Yes, Rhiannon. A soft whispering laughter rose out of the air.
I am here to take you, all of you, to Variga.
Oh, Ayla, I cried. Is it possible, before you take us there, to go somewhere else first?
To find your staff, Emrys Merlin.
How did you know? As a spring bubbles out of the ground, pouring over the soil, the Wind Sister's words tumbled out of the air.
Nothing can long hide from the wind. Not a stealthy girl, nor the secret cave where she hides her treasures, nor even her desire one day to wield great power through magic.
My blood surged angrily. Can we still catch her before she reaches her cave? A sudden gust of wind swept the village common. Hats, cloaks, and aprons lifted into the air, swirling like autumn leaves. All at once, my boots, too, rose off the ground. In an instant, Rhea, Bumblebee, and I were airborne. Chapter 25. All the Voices. As we lifted off from the village common, several people standing near the fountain shrieked in fright, though none shrieked as loud as poor Bumblebee. For my part, I swung my legs freely in the open air, alive with the thrill of flight. It was a thrill that I had known only once before, nestled into the feathers of Trouble's back. Yet this time I was borne aloft, not by another body, but by the very wind itself. Ayla carried us swiftly higher, supporting us on a blanket of air. As the loaf-shaped buildings of Slantos melted into the fog, the golden pool of the bread fountain faded into tan, then brown, then white. Clouds swallowed us whole, leaving nothing visible beyond ourselves. I could hear the whistling of air all around, yet it wasn't too loud, for we were flying with the wind and not against it. "Ayla," I cried, "can you still find her in the fog?"
Patience,
she replied, her airy voice springing from both above and below. The clouds thickened as we dropped lower and banked to the right. Rhea turned to me, her face showing her own growing exhilaration. We were riding, it seemed, on a cloud itself, close enough to touch each other and far enough apart to feel completely free. And, in the case of Bumblebee, completely miserable. His face, still splattered with dough, turned greener with every jostle and sway. Suddenly, just below us, a figure emerged from a gap in the fog. Nimue. She strode purposefully across the grassy plain, her long black hair falling over her shoulders. In her hand she clutched my staff. I could almost hear her clucking to herself in satisfaction. No doubt she was considering what place of honor to give my staff in her cave of treasures, or how she might find some way to turn its hidden powers to her advantage. A thin smile spread across my own face as we drew nearer, casting a trio of ghostly shadows on the ground. Sensing something, she whirled around. She shrieked, seeing me and my companions dropping right out of the sky on top of her. Before she could turn and run, I reached down and grasped the gnarled top of the staff with both hands. "Thief!" she wailed, clinging tightly to her prize. We tugged against each other, trying to twist the staff free. As Ayla bore me aloft again, Nimue herself rose off the plain, her legs kicking wildly. My back and shoulders ached from the strain, but I held on. Currents of air slapped against her, shoving her body this way and that. Yet she refused to let go. We dropped a bit lower, just as a tangle of brambles came into view. Straight through it flew Nimue, the thorns tearing at her legs and ripping her robe. Still she did not release her grip. I felt the staff slip lower in my perspiring hands. Her weight made my shoulders scream with pain. My arms were starting to feel numb. All the while, Nimue twisted and writhed, trying her best to break free. Banking hard to the left, we veered toward a pile of jagged rocks. An instant before she collided, Nimue caught sight of the approaching obstacle. With a terrified shriek, she let go at last. With a thud, she dropped to the ground, landing on her back next to the pile of rocks. Weakly, I pulled the staff to me, gazing again at its familiar markings. The sign of the paired hawks glistened with my own perspiration. I felt whole again, my staff and my hope both restored. As the mist thickened, I glanced down at Nimue. As she sat up, her eyes flashed angrily. She kicked her heels on the turf like an infant, waving her clenched fists at the air, cursing and crying for revenge. Smaller she grew, and smaller. An instant later, she disappeared in a shroud of fog, her shouts replaced by the whistling wind. I twirled the staff in my throbbing hands. "Thank you, Ayla."
"You are welcome, Merlin. Ah, yes."
The wind bore us higher, until the fog began to pull apart, shredding into white waves that rose and fell like the rolling sea. Ships of mist, sails billowing, lifted their prows, only to dash upon vaporous shores. The cloud waves rolled over us, soaking us with spray, churning ceaselessly. I turned to Rhea, her eyes as joyful as Nimue's had been wrathful. "You were so right about her. I don't know how, but she had me, well, confused at first. I wish I had your... what did my mother call them?" "Berries," she said with a laugh.
"Also called instincts."
She flapped her arms in the mist, stretching them like wings.
"Oh, isn't this wonderful? I feel so free, like I'm the wind myself." "You are the wind, Rhiannon."
Ayla's wispy arms encircled us.
"You have all living things within yourself. That is what instincts are, the voices of those living things inside you."
I watched the shredding clouds as Ayla's voice whispered in my own ear.
"You do have instincts, Merlin. You simply do not hear them very well. You have all the voices, old and young, male and female."
"Female? Me?" I scoffed, tapping my sword as the air whooshed past. "I'm a boy."
"Ah, yes, Merlin, you are a boy. And a wonderful thing that is to be. One day, perhaps, you will learn that you can also be more, that you can listen as well as speak, sow as well as reap, create as well as construct. And then you may discover that the merest trembling of a butterfly's wings can be just as powerful as a quake that moves mountains.
Hardly had those words been spoken than a sudden current of air jolted us. Rhea and I rolled into each other while Bumblebee cried out, flailing his arms and legs. His bell-draped hat flew into the air and nearly sailed away before Rhea caught it. As she snatched the hat, several chunks of dough flew off, causing it to rattle noisily again. All at once we burst out of the clouds. As swiftly as hawks, we rose above their fluffy contours. Far below, Fin Cairo revealed itself now like a tapestry unfurling, full of dazzling colors and intricate patterns. There lay the dark hills, swathed in shadows, the flowing ridges broken only by the occasional cluster of trees or jumble of rocks. There ran the red and maroon gorge of Eagle's Canyon, winding away to the south. And there, dappled with sun, stretched the rolling sweep of the rusted plains. I leaned forward, stretching myself prone on a carpet of wind. Soaring headlong over the lands below, I felt for a moment as if I had become a fish again, gliding through an ocean of air rather than water. Buoyed by invisible currents, sailing weightlessly, I flew through the very substance of my breathing. To the north, I followed the contorted coastline of a dark peninsula until it melted into mist. Twisting rivers sparkled below as hills started swelling beneath us. Dimly, beyond the hills, I glimpsed the grim profile of the Lake of the Face. An icy finger ran down my spine as I recalled the image I had seen in those dark waters. The image of Balor's deadly eye. Then, above the whooshing wind, I heard a faint rumbling. It came from somewhere in the snowy mountains ahead, whose crested summits gleamed in the late afternoon light. The rumbling grew louder and louder, rolling like avalanches down the slopes. It seemed that thunder itself must be part of this land. And indeed it was, for we had arrived in the land of the giants. The rumbling swelled as Ayla set us down on a knoll, bristling with short, stubby grass. Rising out of a steeply sloping, rocky ridge, the knoll was one of the few patches of green around. The ground beneath us, like the cliffs on all sides, shook from the noise, or from whatever caused the noise. As soon as Bumblebee's feet touched down, he tottered unsteadily over to an enormous pile of leaves, branches, and ferns that had been left on the knoll for some reason. It covered nearly half of the knoll, rising like a miniature mountain of brush. He fell into the pile, crawled higher, then sprawled on his back. Above the rumbling, he called,
"If I'm going to die in an earthquake, I might at least be somewhere soft."
He smoothed some broken branches beneath his head.
"Besides, I have some difficult digesting to do, not to mention recovering from that ride."
He closed his eyes, wriggling deeper into the ferns.
"Imagine, almost killed twice in the same day."
He yawned, shaking his bells.
"If I weren't such an optimist, I'd say something even worse will happen to me before the day is over."
Seconds later, he was snoring.
"I wish you well, Emrys Merlin."
Louder than usual because of the rumbling, the voice spoke in my ear.
"I wish I could stay with you longer, but I must fly."
"I wish you didn't have to go."
"I know, Emrys Merlin, I know."
Ayla's warm breath caressed my cheek.
"Perhaps on another day we will meet again." "And fly again?"
Rhea lifted her arms as if they were wings.
"Like the wind?" "Perhaps, Rhiannon, perhaps."
With a sudden swell of air, the Wind Sister departed. Chapter 26. Leaping. A great thud sounded from somewhere in the steep-walled valley below the knoll. The ground shook again, knocking both Rhea and me over backward. A plump thrush, its purple wings dotted with white, shrieked and flew away from its perch in the bristly grass. Sitting up, I looked over at Bumblebee, still snoring peacefully in the pile of leaves and brush. What it might take to awaken him, I could not imagine. Crawling on hands and knees, Rhea and I crept slowly to the edge of the knoll. Peering over, we gazed into the valley below. At that instant, an entire section of cliff above the valley cracked open, dangled precariously, then tumbled down in a cloud of rubble and dust. Another rumble filled the air, and the ground beneath us shook violently again. Then, as the dust cleared, I recognized the figures laboring below. Even from this distance, the giants looked enormous and frighteningly powerful. While some of them split boulders apart with hammers the size of pine trees, others hauled the chunks of rock to the center of the valley. Lifting even one such stone would have required 50 men and women, yet the giants moved them around like bales of summer hay. Not far away, more giants worked, cutting and shaping the grey and white stones. Still others fit them carefully into the towers and bridges of a growing city. So this was Varigel. Destroyed by Stangmar's army of warrior goblins, Finkyra's most ancient city was being completely rebuilt, rock by rock. Already its rough-hewn walls and spires mirrored the cliff walls and snowy spires that surrounded the valley. As they labored, the giants chanted in low, rumbling tones. Their words echoed from cliff to cliff, pounding and cracking like stones themselves. Hai gododen katan hoe, hu da credrith mal widan, gonsai belawen, wen cabri, Varigal don Finkyra, dravia, dravia Finkyra. Hud yavardan tendal fe, ro samenya, gyaren kai, hosh waundi, namal storo, Varigal don Finkyra, dravia, dravia Finkyra. I remembered, ages ago it seemed, hearing those same voices chanting the Clegra during the dance of the giants that had finally brought the shrouded castle crashing down. And I remembered hearing Elen sing that same chant to me when I was barely more than a babe in her arms. Talking trees and walking stones, giants are the island's bones. While this land our dance still knows, Varigel crowns Finkyra. Live long, Finkyra. Giants breathe and tempests blow, touch the waves and rivers slow. In the island's realm of snow, Varigel crowns Finkyra. Live long, Finkyra. Bumblebee snorted, rolling over on his bed of branches. A sprig of fern had caught in his hair and seemed to be growing straight out of his ear. With every breath his bells rattled like a pot full of pebbles. Yet the jester slept on, undisturbed. I turned back to watch a wild-haired female giant at the near end of the valley push the base of a stone tower into place with her bare shoulder. From this distance she looked much like the giant on whose immense frame the eagle had landed at the start of the Great Council. I suspected that somewhere down there my old friend Shim was also working, or more likely, doing his best to avoid working. Yet as much as I wanted to see him again, there would be no time to try to find him. So, spoke a melodic voice behind us, why do you come to the land of the giants? Rhea and I spun around. Seated on a rounded, mossy rock, a rock that had been empty only seconds before, was a tall, pale woman. Her golden hair, stretching almost to her knees, fell about her like rays of light. She wore a simple light blue robe, yet her very posture made it seem like an elegant dress. Her eyes shone unusually bright, as if intense flames burned inside her. Winsome though she was, I steeled myself. I may not have Rhea's instincts, but I won't let what happened with Nimue happen again. Reaching for my staff in the grass, I pulled it closer to my side. The bright-eyed woman laughed gently. I see you don't trust me. Rhea, while still sitting on the grass, straightened her back and seemed for a moment to study the woman's face. Then she drew in her breath. I trust you. We came here to learn about leaping. I nearly jumped out of my boots. Rhea, you don't know her. I know I don't. And yet, I do. She makes me want to, well, trust in the berries. There's something about her that, I don't know, that reminds me of the stars shining at the darkest time of night. The woman rose slowly, her hair swirling about her waist. That is because, dear girl, I am the spirit of a star. You know me, in fact, as one of your constellations. Despite the quaking ground, Rhea rose to her feet. Guri, she said softly, so softly that I could barely hear her above the continuing rumble. You are Guri of the golden hair. Yes, I live in your westernmost sky, and I have watched you, Rhea, as well as you, Merlin.
even as you have watched me." Dumbfounded, I too clambered to my feet. It seemed so long ago, that night under the Shamora tree, when Rhea had first shown me Guri of the golden hair, and how to see constellations in a completely new way, to find their shapes, not just in the stars themselves, but in the spaces between the stars. Rhea took a small step closer on the grassy knoll. "Why did you come all the way here?" Guri laughed again, more heartily than before. This time a circle of golden light glowed in the air around her. "I came here to help the giants of your land rebuild their ancient capital. For you see, I also came here ages ago, when Varigel was first built. I stood by Dagda's side, providing the light he needed to work through the night, when he carved the very first giant from the stony side of a mountain." "You came such a long way." "Yes, Merlin. I came here by leaping." My legs nearly buckled beneath me, though not because of the quaking ground. "Leaping? Can you tell me what I need to know?" "You already know the soul of this song," the star declared. "You only need to find it within yourself." "We have so little time. The moon is barely a quarter full, and my mother—" My throat tightened, reducing my voice to a whisper. "She's going to die, all because of me." Guri studied me intently. She seemed to be listening to my innermost thoughts, oblivious to the continuing rumble from the valley below. "Just what did you do?" "I found the speaking shell, whose power brought her here." Guri tilted her head, sending a cascade of hair tumbling over her arm. "No, Merlin. Think again." Puzzled, I rubbed my chin. "But the shell—" "Think again." I caught Rhea's eye. "You mean it was me, not the shell?" The woman nodded. "The shell needed your power to do it. Your power of leaping, unformed as it is. One day, perhaps, you may master that power. Then you may send people, or things, or dreams. You could travel through the worlds, or even through time, as you choose." "Time?" A vague memory stirred within me. "When I was very young, I used to dream about living backward in time. Honestly, just so I could relive my favorite moments over and over again." A spare smile touched her face. "Perhaps you will come to master that as well. Then you could grow younger every day, while everyone around you grows older." As much as the idea intrigued me, I shook my head. "That's only a dream. I'm afraid I'll never master anything. Look what disaster I caused when I brought my mother to Finkyra." "Tell me," said Guri, "what have you learned from that?" Another quake shook the ground. Rocks from the cliff nearest us broke loose, sending up a cloud of dust as they clattered down to the valley below. I grasped my staff for better balance. "Well, I've learned that leaping, like all magic I suppose, has limits." "True. Even the great spirit doctor has limits. For all he knows about the powers of the universe, he cannot bring someone back to life who has died." Guri looked suddenly pained, as if she were recalling something that had happened long ago. After a long pause, she spoke again. "Have you learned anything else?" I hesitated, shifting my weight on the grass. "Well, that you must think carefully before bringing someone or something to a new place, since what you do could have unintended consequences. Serious ones." "And why do you suppose that is so?" Squeezing the knotted top of my staff, I thought hard. The wind whistled across the ridge, chafing my face. "Because, you see, one action is connected to another.
Throwing a single pebble in the wrong place could start a rock slide. The truth is, everything is connected to everything else. Guri burst into laughter, just as my staff erupted in blue flames. A golden circle of light glowed in the air around her, even as the image of a star inside a circle appeared on the shaft. I let my fingers stroke it. You have learned well, Merlin. Everything plays a part in the great and glorious song of the stars. Remembering the phrase from the walls of Arbasa, I nodded. I only wish I knew enough to use the power of leaping right now, for I must find my way, and quickly, to a dragon's lair, though I don't have any idea where to look. Guri turned to the east, her long hair shimmering. The dragon you seek is the same one who was lulled into enchanted sleep ages ago by your grandfather Tuatha, and yet even your grandfather's powers were not great enough to resist Balor, the guardian of the Otherworld Well. If you should survive the dragon and make your way there, do you really expect to fare any better? No, I only hope to try. For a long moment she studied me. The sleeping dragon's lair lies in the Lost Lands, just across the water from here. As it happens, it also lies not very far from the Otherworld Well, though that matters little to you, since you must still voyage all the way to the Forgotten Island before you go there. With my finger I traced the new marking on my staff. Could you, perhaps, send us to the dragon's lair? Guri's eyes shone a bit brighter. I could, yes, but I prefer to let someone else do it. Someone you know, who can get you there almost as fast as I can. Rhea and I traded perplexed glances. The star motioned toward the dour jester, sprawled on the enormous brush pile. Your sleeping friend over there. Bumblebee? You can't be serious. Guri's laughter rang out. Not him, though I dare say he may yet show himself capable of some surprising leaps. Again she pointed. I mean the sleeping friend beneath him. Before I could ask what she meant, Guri grew brighter and brighter until she glowed so intensely that even my second sight could not bear to watch. Like Rhea, I turned away. A few seconds later, the light suddenly diminished. We turned back, only to find that Guri of the golden hair had vanished. At that instant, the brush pile itself stirred. Chapter 27. Another Crossing. The pile of brush lurched suddenly to the side, hurling the sleeping Bumblebee into the air. His bells clanged like a blacksmith, and his shriek, easily heard above the rumbling from the valley below, joined with the surprised shouts of Rhea and me. Spraying branches, leaves, and fern fronds across the grassy notch, the pile of leaves bent, twisted, and sat up. Two enormous arms stretched to either side, while a pair of hairy feet kicked free from the debris. A head lifted, showing wide pink eyes and a cavernous mouth that opened in a yawn. Just below the eyes, a gargantuan nose bulged like a swollen potato. "Shim!" cried Rhea and I at once. Finishing his yawn, the giant looked down on us in surprise. He rubbed his eyes, then looked again.
Is you a dream? Or is you real?
We're real, I declared. Shim scrunched his nose doubtfully.
Really, truly, honestly?
Really, truly, honestly. Rhea stepped forward and patted one of his feet, which towered over her. It's good to see you again, Shim. With a great smile, the giant reached out with one arm and gently scooped us into the palm of his hand.
I think I is still dreaming, but it's you, the truly you.
He brought his nose a little closer and took a sniff.
You smells like bread, goodly bread.
I nodded. Ambrosia, like we had that night with clip3. Do you remember, good Shim? I wish we'd brought you some. But we were in a hurry, you see. A great hurry. The immense nose scrunched again.
Is you still full of madness?
You could put it that way.
Ever since that day we firstly meets, you is full of madness.
The giant rocked with a thunderous laugh, swaying on the grassy knoll, shaking loose some rocks that bounced down into the valley.
That day you almost gets stinged by thousands of bees.
And you were nothing but a blundering ball of honey. Rhea, who had managed to rise to her knees in the fleshy palm, joined in. You were so small, I was sure you were a dwarf. Shim's pink eyes glowed with pride.
I is small no more.
Another tumultuous crash from the valley filled the air, rocking the ridge. Even Shim's mighty arm swayed like a tree in a gale. Rhea and I clung to his thumb for support. His expression turned serious.
They is workings hard down there. I is supposed to brings the branches for cooking the supper.
He looked suddenly sheepish.
I only wanted to rolls in the branches and takes a little nap. A briefly little nap.
We're glad you did, I replied. We need your help. A long, painful moan came from the loose branches at the far end of the notch. Before I could say anything, Shim reached over with his free hand and lifted Bumblebee by his heavy cloak. Draped with drooping ferns and broken branches, frowning with his whole face down to his layered chins, the gloomy jester looked half alive at best. Rhea watched the dangling jester with concern. Did you see him go flying when Shim woke up? I gave her a sardonic grin. Maybe that was the leap that Guri was talking about.
Oh! Groaned Bumblebee, holding his head. My head feels like a rock that just bounced down one of these cliffs. I must have rolled off that pile of...
All at once, he realized that he was being carried over the knoll by a giant. He struggled, swatting at the huge thumb that was hooked under his cloak.
Help! I'm about to be eaten!
Shim grunted and shook his head at the bedraggled jester.
You isn't very tasty, that's easily to see. I wouldn't put you in my mouth for anythings.
I waved at Bumblebee. Don't worry, this giant's a friend of ours. Bumblebee, swaying before Shim's nose, continued to flail wildly.
Such a tragedy, he wailed. All my humour and wisdom lost forever down a giant's gullet.
Shim dropped him into the palm of his other hand. Bumblebee landed in a heap beside Rhea and me. He struggled to stand, took a swing at Shim's nose, and fell flat on his face again. An enormous grin spread across Shim's face.
At least he's funny.
Bumblebee, who was trying to stand again, froze.
Do you mean that? Funny enough to make you laugh?
Not that funny,
boomed Shim, his voice so powerful it almost blew us all over the edge of his palm.
Just enough to makes me grin.
The jester finally stood, trying to keep his balance while squaring his shoulders and straightening his cloak.
Good giant. You are more intelligent than I had thought at first.
He bowed awkwardly.
I am Bumblebee the Mirthful, jester to...
Nobody. I ignored his glare and spoke to Shim. As I was saying, we need your help. We need to get to the lair of the sleeping dragon, the one Tuatha battled long ago. It's somewhere across the water. The giant's grin faded as the rising wind howled across the cliffs.
You must be kidding, Lee.
I fear he's not,
said Bumblebee. His usual glumness returned.
You might as well eat us all now, before the dragon does.
If it's really a sleeping dragon, asked Rhea, just how dangerous can it be?
Verily,
thundered Shim, his whole frame swaying like a great tree in a storm.
For starters, the dragon is still hungrily even while it sleeps. For enders, it could wake up any time.
He paused, tilting his huge head in thought.
Nobodies know when Tuatha's sleeping spell will wears off and the dragon will wakes up. Although the legends say that it will happen on the darkest day in the life of Vinkyra.
Bumblebee sighed.
Sounds like a typical day for me.
Hush! I gazed up at Shim. Will you take us there right away?
All right, but it is madness. Certainly, definitely, absolutely.
Scanning the knolls strewn with brush, he bit his great lip.
But firstly, I needs to bring these branches down to Varigel.
Please no, I begged. I scanned the afternoon sky, afraid to see the rising sliver of the moon. Every minute counts now, Shim. I'm almost out of time.
I supposes I is already late with these pokingly branches.
Then you'll do it? Shim replied by standing and taking a single enormous stride along the spine of the ridge. Rocked by the jolt, we fell together in a jumble on his palm. Untangling ourselves was made more difficult by the giant's bouncing gait. But we finally succeeded, except for Bumblebee, whose cloak had wrapped itself tightly around his head and shoulders. As he struggled to free himself, his bells were mercifully silent under the cloak. Rhea and I, meanwhile, crawled to the edge of Shim's palm and peered through the gaps in his fingers. Wind rushed past our faces as we watched the landscape transform. So great were Shim's strides that the chanting of the giants and the rumbling of their labors soon faded away completely. He stepped over boulder fields as if they were mere clusters of pebbles, crushing rock ledges with his feet. Mountain passes that would have taken us days to scale, he climbed in a few minutes. He traversed yawning crevasses with the ease of a rabbit hopping over a stick. Before long, the terrain began to flatten. Hillsides of trees replaced the snow-draped ridges, while the valleys widened into broad meadows painted with purple and yellow flowers. Shim paused only once to blow on the boughs of an apple tree, showering us with fruit. Unlike Bumblebee, who hadn't yet regained his appetite, Rhea and I ate the apples avidly. Shim sped along, so fast that I had only barely noticed the expanding sweep of blue ahead, when his heavy foot splashed into water. In another moment, he was wading through a channel, surrounded by a flock of screeching gulls. His voice boomed, frightening the birds.
I remembers when you carries me across a ragingly river.
Right, I shouted to be heard above the wind and screeching gulls. The crossing was so rough, I had to carry you on my shoulder.
That would be hardly now. Certainly, definitely, absolutely.
Turning my second sight across the channel, I noticed a line of dark hills, as rugged as a row of jagged teeth on the horizon. The Lost Lands. Well, I remembered the words clip3 had used to describe that territory. Uncharted and unexplored. With a deadly dragon sleeping somewhere in those hills, I didn't wonder why. Instinctively, I reached for the hilt of my sword. Minutes later, Shim stepped out of the channel, his hairy feet slapping on the shore. He set us down on a wide bank of flat rock. No flowers nor even grasses sprouted here. Even the glowing light of approaching sunset brought no softer hues to the land. Only a shiny black ash coated the rocks, stretching to the hillsides far inland. The air reeked of charcoal, like an abandoned fire pit. I realized that this entire coastline and everything that once grew on it must have been scorched by powerful flames. Even the rocks themselves looked cracked and buckled, seared by repeated blasts of extreme heat. Then, scanning the rugged hills, I found the source. A thin curl of smoke, rising from a hollow not far inland. "That's where we're going," I declared. Shim bent his worried face so low that his chin almost touched the top of my staff.
"Is you certainly? Nobody goes to visit a dragon on purposely."
"I do."
"You is foolishly, you know that?"
"I know that. Too well, believe me." The giant's moist eyes blinked.
"Then good luck. I misses you. And you too, sweetly, Rhea. I hopes to makes another crossing with you one daily."
Bumblewee's bells jangled as he wagged his head.
"With the dragon's lair just over there, we probably don't have another day."
With that, Shim straightened his back. He gazed down on us for another moment, then turned and strode straight into the channel. The setting sun, streaking the western sky with lavender and pink, outlined his massive shoulders and head. High above, a pale crescent moon lifted into the sky. Chapter 28. Eliminating. Rather than try to approach the lair of the dragon at night, I decided to wait until dawn. While the others slept fitfully on the blackened rocks, I sat awake, thinking. For the 6th lesson, the lesson of eliminating, could mean only one thing. I must slay the dragon. My stomach knotted at the very thought. How could one boy, even a boy armed with a magical sword, possibly accomplish such a thing? Dragons, as I knew from my mother's stories, were incredibly powerful, astonishingly quick, and supremely clever. I recalled the night when, her face aglow from the fire in our earthen hut, she had described one dragon who destroyed a dozen giants with a single swipe of his tail, then roasted them for supper with his fiery breath. How, then, was I to succeed? Unlike the wizard Tuatha, I knew none of the magic that might help. I knew only that, asleep or not, a dragon would be terrifying to approach and nearly impossible to eliminate. As the first rays of sunlight touched the charred shoreline, spreading like fire across the waves, I reluctantly stood. My hands felt cold, as did my heart. I pulled one of Shim's apples from the pocket of my tunic and took a bite. Crisp and flavorful though it was, I hardly tasted it. When nothing but the core remained, I tossed it aside. Rhea sat up. "You didn't sleep at all, did you?" I merely gazed at the jagged line of hills, now brushed with pink. "No, and I don't have even a hint of a plan to show for it. If you have any sense, stay here. If I survive, I'll come back for you." She shook her head so vigorously that some of the leaves enmeshed in her brown curls tumbled to the ground. "I thought we discussed that already, back at the Lake of the Face. But this time the risks are too great. Rhea, you've been warning me ever since the Dark Hills that I could get lost. Well, the truth is, there is more than one way to be lost. And that's how I feel right now." I blew a long, slow breath. "Don't you see? Only a wizard, a true wizard, can defeat a dragon. I don't know what it takes to be a wizard, really. Strength, or skill, or spirit? Clip3 said it's all that and more. All I know is that whatever it takes, I don't have it." Rhea's face pinched. "I don't believe that, and neither does your mother. For all your instincts, this time you're wrong." I glanced at Bumblebee, huddled over his thick cloak. Should I give him the same choice as I gave you? The lanky jester suddenly rolled over.
"I'm coming, if that's what you mean."
He stretched his long arms.
"If ever you needed my wit and good humour, it's now. on the day of your certain death."
With an expression as sombre as one of Bumblebee's own, I turned toward the hills. From one of the wedge-like hollows between them rose a dark column of smoke. It twisted skyward, marring the sunrise. I took a step toward it, then another, and another. At each step, the base of my staff clicked on the rocks like a door snapping shut. Across the scorched land I marched, with Rhea by my side and Bumblebee not far behind. Knowing that stealth was essential, we tried to tread as softly as foxes. No one spoke. I rested my staff on my shoulder to keep it from striking the rocks. The jester even clamped his hands over his hat to muffle his bells. As we drew nearer to the smoking hollow, my feeling of foreboding deepened. While the dragon might wait for Finkyra's darkest day to wake, my own darkest day had certainly arrived. A low, roaring sound reached us across the blackened flats, deep as the bass strings of a titanic harp, regular as breathing. It was, I knew, the sound of the dragon snoring. It swelled steadily as we approached. The air grew hot, uncomfortably hot, as the rocks lifted into the charred hills. Pace by pace, keeping quiet, we drew nearer to the column of smoke. Here the rocks had not just been seared by flames, but also pounded and trampled by enormous weight. Boulders had been crushed, gullies had been flattened. All living things had been destroyed. Eliminated. Hardly daring to breathe, we crossed a pile of crushed stone. Suddenly, Bumblebee slipped and fell. Rocks skittered down the pile, smacking into the rubble at the bottom. That sound, however, was obscured by the clamorous banging of his bells. They rang out, echoing among the hills like a clap of thunder. I glared at him, whispering, "Take off that cursed hat, you club-footed fool! You'll wake the dragon before we even get there!" He scowled. Reluctantly, he pulled off his three-cornered hat and stuffed it under his cloak. I led the way into the steep-walled hollow, wiping my brow from the heat. Even through my boots, the soles of my feet burned. The sweltering air rippled like water, vibrating with the snoring sound. Everything reeked of charcoal. With every step I took, the walls of rock drew closer together, submerging me in darkness. Suddenly I halted. There, partly shrouded by shadows, lay the dragon. He was even larger than I had feared, as huge as a hillside himself. Coiled like a great serpent, his green and orange body, covered with armored scales, could have almost filled the lake of the face. His head, smoke pouring from the nostrils, lay across his left foreleg. Beneath his nose ran a row of scales so blackened from smoke that they resembled a huge moustache. Every inhale revealed his rows of sharp-edged teeth. Every exhale flexed his powerful shoulder muscles and shook the vast wings folded against his back. Claws, as sharp as the sword on my belt but 10 times as long, glistened in the early morning light. Midway down one claw, like an oversized ring, sat a skull large enough to have belonged to Shim. Beneath his scaled belly, treasures gleamed and sparkled. Crowns and necklaces, swords and shields, trumpets and flutes, all crafted of gold or silver, all studded with jewels. Rubies, amethysts, jades, emeralds, sapphires, and huge pearls lay strewn everywhere. Never in my life had I imagined that such a vast hoard existed. Yet I felt no desire whatsoever to comb through it, for scattered throughout were skulls of all sizes and shapes, some gleaming white, others scorched by fire. I crept deeper into the hollow, with Rhea and Bumblebee just behind. We cringed as one at the slow, roaring rhythm of the dragon's breathing. His enormous eyes were closed, though not completely, revealing slits of smouldering yellow. I couldn't shake the feeling that this beast was as much awake as asleep. At that instant, the dragon's jaws opened a crack, A thin tongue of flame shot out, scorching the black rocks and some stray skulls. Bumblebee jumped backward, dropping his bell-draped hat out of his cloak. It hit the rocks at his feet with a jarring clang. The dragon suddenly snorted and shifted his gargantuan bulk. His eyelids quivered, opening a sliver more. Bumblebee gasped in fright. His legs wobbled. Seeing that he looked about to faint, Rhea grabbed his arm. Then, with gruesome slowness, the dragon raised the claw wearing the giant skull. Like someone about to eat a rare delicacy, he brought it to his nostrils, savoring its aroma. His eyelids trembled, but did not open, as he released a searing blast of flames. At last, the roasting completed. The dragon's purple lips grasped the skull and tore it from the claw. A loud crunching echoed in the hollow, the sound of enormous teeth reducing the morsel to splinters. With an immense puff of smoke, the dragon resumed snoring. The three of us shuddered in unison. Glancing grimly at Rhea, I handed her my staff. At the same time, I laid my right hand on the silver hilt of my sword. Slowly, ever so slowly, I drew it from the scabbard. As it emerged, the blade rang faintly, like a distant chime. The sleeping dragon suddenly growled, releasing a puff of thick smoke from his nostrils. His pointed ears pricked forward, listening to the ringing sound. Meanwhile, his dream seemed to alter. He growled viciously, bared his teeth, and slashed at the air with his claws. I stood as rigid as a statue. My arm began to ache from holding the heavy sword above my head, but I dared not lower it for fear it would make another sound. After several minutes, the dragon seemed to relax a little. The growling subsided, and the claws fell still. Cautiously, I crept forward on the rocks, taking one small step at a time. The dragon towered over me, each of his scales as big as my entire body. Perspiration stung my eyes. If I have only one blow, where to strike? Those armored scales covered his chest, legs, back, tail, and even his orange ears. Perhaps, if I ran the sword through one of the closed eyes, that might do it. Closer and closer I edged. The smoky air made me want to cough, but I did all I could to resist. My hand squeezed the hilt. All at once, the tail lashed out like a monstrous whip. I had no time even to move, let alone run. As the tail exploded to its full length, one of the barbs at the end coiled tightly around my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. In the same instant, the other barb wound around my arm holding the sword, preventing me from moving it at all. I was totally helpless. Rhea released a muffled shriek. I felt the dragon tense again, squeezing me all the harder. Yet the yellow slits of his eyes opened no wider. He seemed to be still asleep, or half asleep, and, judging from the curl of his lips, he seemed to be about to enjoy a thoroughly realistic dream about swallowing a boy with a sword. At the edge of my second sight, I watched Rhea fall to her knees. Bumblebee knelt awkwardly beside her. His head hung low on his paunchy chins. Then, unaccountably, he started to sing. It was, I soon realized, a funeral dirge, sung in low, moaning tones. As much as I squirmed in the dragon's grip, I squirmed still more at his words.
A dragon savours all he eats, but values best the living treats, who squirm and squeal before they die, the filling of a dragon's pie. Oh, dragon, 'tis my friend you eat. Alas, how sweet the dragon's meat. The dragon loves the crunch of bones, and all the dying cries and groans of people gone without a trace into deep digestive space. Oh, dragon, 'tis my friend you eat. Alas, how sweet the dragon's milk. My friend in dragon's mouth interred was even robbed his final word. For down he went into that hole, his parting sentence swallowed whole. Oh, dragon, 'tis my friend you eat. Alas, how sweet the dragon's meat.
Even before Bumblebee had finished, the dragon's jaws opened. I watched aghast as the rows of jagged teeth, charred by flames, revealed themselves. With all my strength, I struggled to escape, but the tail only squeezed harder. The jaws, meanwhile, opened wider. Suddenly, out of the depths behind the open jaws, came a gruff, hoarse sound that could be only one thing: a laugh. A deep, belching, hearty laugh. A billowing cloud of smoke came as well, blackening the air. The laugh continued, rolling right down the dragon's serpentine form, shaking first his head, then his neck, then his gigantic belly, then finally his tail. Before long, the entire beast quaked in raucous laughter, swaying on his hoard of treasures. The tail released me. I dropped to the ground, breathless, dazed, but alive. Quickly, I crawled through the black cloud, dragging my sword. A moment later, Rhea ran to my side and helped me to my feet. Coughing from the smoke, we stumbled out of the hollow. Behind us, the dragon's coarse laughter began to grow quieter. In a matter of seconds, his roaring snores had returned. I glanced back to see the thin slits of his eyes shining in the shadows. When at last we were well away from the dragon's lair, we collapsed on a bench of black rock. Rhea threw her arms around my neck, so different from the embrace of the dragon. I squeezed her in return. Then I turned to Bumblebee. In a hoarse voice I declared, "You did it, you know. You made the dragon laugh." Bumblebee's head dropped.
I know. A terrible, terrible thing. I am humiliated, devastated.
"What do you mean?" I shook him by the shoulders. "You saved me!"
Terrible,
repeated the dour jester.
Just terrible. Once again I botched the delivery. I was singing one of my saddest, most sorrowful hymns, one that should break anyone's heart.
He bit his lip.
But what did it do instead? Tickled him, entertained him. When I tried to amuse, I sadden. When I tried to grieve, I amuse. Oh, I'm a failure, a miserable failure.
He sighed morosely.
And to make matters worse, I've lost my hat, my jester's hat. So on top of not sounding like a jester, now I don't even look like one.
Rhea and I traded amused glances. Then, without further delay, I pulled off one of my boots. Bumblebee watched me gloomily.
Injure your foot, did you?
No, I have a promise to keep. With that, I sunk my teeth into the leather tongue of the boot. I ripped a section loose and chewed vigorously. No amount of chewing could soften the leather, though it did fill my mouth with the flavors of dirt, grass, and perspiration. With great difficulty, I swallowed. Bumblebee suddenly caught his breath. He straightened his back slightly. His downturned chins lifted a notch. He was not smiling, nor even grinning, but at least, for a moment, he was no longer frowning. As I began to take another bite, he laid his hand on my back.
Hold there. One bite is enough. You may need that boot for another purpose.
An odd, muffled sound, almost like a smothered giggle, erupted from his throat.
I really did make him laugh, didn't I?
Indeed you did. The frowns returned.
I doubt I could do it again, though. Just a fluke.
Slipping on my boot, I shook my head. It was no fluke. You could do it again. Thrusting out his chest, Bumblebee stood before me.
Then when you go back into that smoking oven to try to slay that beast, I will go with you.
As will I, declared Rhea. I looked at their loyal faces for a moment, then slid my sword back into the scabbard. You won't have to. I leaned closer on the scorched rock. You see, I'm not going to slay the dragon. Both of them stared at me. Raising the staff, Rhea asked,
You have to do it, don't you? How else can you learn the first lesson of eliminating?
I reached for the gnarled shaft of hemlock, spinning it slowly in my hand. I think, perhaps, I already have.
What?
Fingering the staff's knotty top, I glanced toward the shadowed lair. Something happened to me when the dragon laughed.
Right, agreed Bumblebee. You broke free of his tail.
No, I mean something else. Did you hear how full and hearty that laugh was? It made me feel that, well, as vicious and bloodthirsty as the dragon is, he couldn't be completely evil. Or else, he couldn't laugh like that. Bumblebee looked at me as if I had lost my mind.
I'll wager that dragon has laughed every time he has destroyed a village.
I nodded. Perhaps so. But something about his laugh gave me the feeling that somehow he isn't so completely different from you and me. That he has some worth, even if we don't comprehend it. Rhea almost smiled. Bumblebee, though, furrowed his brow.
I don't understand what this has to do with eliminating.
Lifting my right hand, smudged with charcoal, I touched the lids of my sightless eyes. You see these eyes? Useless, scarred forever, like my cheeks. And do you know why? Because I tried to destroy another boy's life. I don't know whether or not he survived, but I doubt it. I tried to eliminate him. His brow wrinkled still more.
I still don't understand.
The point is this. Eliminating is sometimes necessary, but it comes only at a price. It may be to your body, or to your soul, but the price is always there, because every living thing is precious somehow. The shaft of my staff sizzled with a blast of blue light. Where bare wood had been before, there was now the image of a dragon's tail.
The 6th song is done, exclaimed Rhea. Now you have only one left, the Song of Seeing.
Tapping the top of the staff, I examined the dragon's tail, etched not far from the glowing star within a circle. Shifting my gaze to the lifeless stretch of coastline, as blackened and burned as the inside of a fire pit, I viewed the deep blue channel and the distant peaks of Varigel beyond. There may be only one song left, but there are only a few days left, too. Bumblebee slumped lower.
No more than 3, judging from the moon last night.
And we need to get all the way to the Forgotten Island and back.
Impossible,
declared the jester. He shook his head for emphasis, until he remembered that he no longer wore any bells.
Merlin, you have done well, impossibly well, to get this far. But you, like the rest of us, caught a glimpse of that place from the cliffs of the Treelings. No one in living memory has ever gone to the Forgotten Island. How can you hope to find your way there and back in only 3 days?
I tried to imagine the route we would need to travel. Across water, over peaks, through forests, and past whatever barriers of enchantment shielded the island. The entire breadth of Finkyra, full of untold dangers. Sadly, I turned to Rhea. For once, I am afraid Bumblebee's right. This time we don't have the wind or a giant to help us. Rhea stomped her foot on the charred rock.
I'm not giving up. We've come too far. You have 6 of the 7 songs. And I even have the location of the other world well.
I jumped to my feet. You have what?
The location of the stairwell, where Balor stands guard.
She ran a hand through her hair, twisting some curls in her fingers.
Guri of the golden hair gave it to me, sent a vision of it right into my mind, when she told us the other world well wasn't far from the dragon's lair.
Why didn't you tell me?
She told me not to. She thought you might be tempted to skip the Forgotten Island entirely.
Slowly, I sat down again on the bench of black rock. Putting my nose almost to hers, I spoke softly but firmly. That is exactly what we're going to do.
You can't, she protested. You'll need to find the soul of seeing before you stand any chance at all against Balor. Don't you remember the words you found in Arbasa? But lo, do not attempt the well until the songs are done, for dangers stalk your every step, with Balor's eye but one. You'll die for sure if you try to fight Balor without all 7 of the songs.
My stomach knotted as I recalled Tuatha's own warning to me. Heed well my words, young colt. Without all 7 songs, you shall lose more than your quest. You shall lose your very life. I cleared my throat. But Rhea, if I don't drop the 7th song, my mother will surely die. Don't you see? It's our only hope. Our only chance. Her eyes narrowed.
There's something more, isn't there? I can feel it.
No, you're wrong.
I am not. You're afraid of something, aren't you?
Those instincts again. My hands closed into fists. Yes, I am afraid of the lesson on seeing. It frightens me more than all the others combined. I don't know why, Rhea. Shaking her head, she leaned back against the charred rock.
Then whatever awaits you on the Forgotten Island is important. You must go there, Merlin. For you as well as Elen. And there's another reason, too.
Another?
Guri told me something else. She said that while you were on the Forgotten Island, you must find a bough of mistletoe. Wear it, she said, when you enter the other world well. It will help you make your way safely to the realm of Dogda. Without it, your task will be much harder.
My task could not be any harder as it is. Please, Rhea, no bough of mistletoe is going to make enough difference to justify using up what little time is left. You must help me. Show me the way to the other world well. She scuffed her boot of woven bark on the blackened rock.
Well, if I do, and you somehow survive, will you promise to do something?
Her eyes grew suddenly moist.
Even if I'm not around to hold you to your promise.
I swallowed. Of course I will. And why wouldn't you be around?
Never mind that.
She blinked back her tears.
Promise me that, if you should survive, you will one day go to the Forgotten Island and learn whatever it is you're meant to learn there.
I promise. And I'm going to take you with me. She stood abruptly, scanning the bleak ridges.
Then let's go.
We have some hard trekking ahead of us. Part 3. Chapter 29. The Final Trek. Wordlessly, Rhea led us deeper into the wasteland of rubble. Somewhere on these ridges lay the entrance to the spirit world, and the deadly ogre who guarded it. Yet if Balor indeed lived here, he lived without the company of anything that breathed or sprouted or moved. For where the dark hills had seemed devoid of life, except for the occasional withered tree, these hills seemed utterly hostile to life. The dragon's fiery blasts had not left a single tree, nor shrub, nor clump of moss anywhere. Only charcoal. I wished that I still carried the flowering harp on my shoulder, and that I might use its magic to bring even a few blades of grass to these slopes. No landscape could have been more different from Rhea's home in the lush glades of Druma Wood. Yet she moved with as much confidence and grace over the piles of scorched rocks as she would have moved through groves of scented ferns. She headed due east, never veering. If staying on course meant scrambling straight up a crumbling rock fall or leaping over a deep crevasse, then that was where she led us, hour after hour. Still, as much as I admired her endurance, I admired some of her other qualities even more. She loved life, and all living things, true to her childhood in the boughs of a great oak tree. She carried with her a quiet, soulful wisdom, reminding me of the tales of the Greek goddess Athena, and, even more, of my own mother. I felt a surge of gratitude that Rhea had allowed her life to entwine with my own, wrapping us together as tightly as the woodland vines of her garb. And I found myself appreciating as never before the virtues of her garb itself. The tight yet flexible weave around her elbows, the broad green leaves across her shoulders, the playful designs along her collar. As we trekked over the desolate ridges, her suit of woven vines lifted my spirits, if only a little. Its very greenness somehow gave me hope that even the bleakest lands might be coaxed again to flower, that even the gravest fault might one day be forgiven. For, as Rhea herself knew well, those woven vines held a surprising truth. No wizard's magic, however impressive, could be greater than nature's own magic. How else could a new sapling spring from lifeless soil? And was it possible that I, like every living thing, might actually share in some of that magic of renewal? Because the ridges lay in parallel lines running north and south, we couldn't turn down any of the valleys without changing direction. So we climbed up the steep slopes, only to plunge immediately down to other sides. We reached the valley floors, only to start climbing again. By the time the sun hung low in the sky at our backs, and long shadows fell from the blackened rocks, my knees and thighs wobbled from the strain. Even my staff hardly helped. It was clear from Bumblewee's constant stumbling, often on the hem of his own cloak, that he felt no sturdier. Still worse, we found not even a trickle of water. My own tongue felt like a dry sliver of wood inside my mouth. I might have been more thirsty than the others thanks to my bite of boot leather, but probably not much. The long day of trekking over the rubble had left us all parched. Yet Rhea never slowed down. Though she said nothing, she seemed more grimly determined than ever. Perhaps it was simply the urgency of our quest, or perhaps it was something else, something that only she knew. In any case, my own mood was no less grim. The voice of Tuatha still thundered in my ears, kindling my fears, just as it had kindled the light in the blue stones surrounding his grave. Immensely wise and powerful though he was, he had still lost his life to Baelor's deadly gaze. And why? Because of hubris. Wasn't I guilty of the same flaw, daring to confront Baelor with only 6 of the songs to my name? Yes, and no. My hubris had spawned this whole mess to begin with, yet now my actions were driven more by desperation, and also by fear. For Rhea had been right. I was relieved, truly relieved, to have avoided the Forgotten Island and whatever the Song of Seeing might have entailed. That song haunted me like a terrible dream, as terrible as the one that had made me claw at my own face on that night in the rusted plains. I doubted that I could ever find the soul of seeing with my useless eyes and limited second sight, and I suspected that to see like a wizard could require something else entirely, something that I surely lacked. And that was only the beginning of my fears. What if there were no truth to the prophecy that only a child of human blood could defeat Ritagawa or his servant Baylor? Tuatha himself had hinted as much. The prophecy may be true, and it may be false. Yet even if it is true, the truth often has more than one face. Whatever the prophecy might have meant, I certainly couldn't rely on it. The sad truth was, I couldn't even rely on myself. A loose rock clattered down the slope from above, barely missing the toe of my boot. I looked up to find Rhea disappearing over the top of an outcropping that jutted from the ridge like a chiseled nose. How odd, I thought. With so much of this ridge yet to climb, why had she chosen to go straight over such an outcropping rather than around it? The answer struck me as I noticed a glint of moisture on the rocks ahead. Water! But from where? The higher I climbed up the outcropping, the more wet patches I discovered. Even a scraggly tuft of moss, alive and green, had rooted itself in the crack between two stones. When at last I reached the top, I stopped short, for there, not 10 paces away, bubbled a small spring, forming a clear pool of water. Rhea was already drinking from it. I ran to her side, plunging my whole face into the pool. With the first swallow, my tongue tingled ever so slightly. With the next, it sprang back to life, feeling the slap and sting of coldness. Like Rhea, I drank and drank, filling myself with liquid. Bumblebee, too, collapsed beside the spring, his slurps and gasps joining with our own. At last, when I could hold no more, I turned to Rhea. She was sitting with her knees drawn close to her chest, watching the setting sun paint streaks of red and purple across the western sky. Water dripped from her hair onto her shoulders. I wiped the trickle from my chin and slid a little closer on the rocks. "Rhea, are you thinking about Baylor?" She nodded. "I saw him in the Lake of the Face," I said. "He was killing me, making me look into his eye." She swung her face my way. Though sunset pink glowed in her hair, her eyes looked somber. "I saw Baylor in the Lake of the Face, too." She started to say something more, then caught herself. My throat tightened. Are we close? Very. Should we push on and get there tonight?" Bumblebee, who was arranging some rocks so that he could lie down beside the pool, jumped. "No!" Rhea gave a sigh. "There's almost no moon left, and we need the sleep. We might as well camp here tonight." She felt the rough contours of the charred rocks, then reached for my hand, wrapping her forefinger around my own. "Merlin, I'm afraid." "So am I." I followed her gaze to the horizon. Above the jagged hills, the sky now loomed as red as blood. "When I was little," I said quietly, "I sometimes felt so afraid that I couldn't sleep. And whenever that happened, my mother would always do the same thing to help me feel better. She would tell me a story." Rhea's finger squeezed mine tighter. "Did she really? What a wonderful idea, telling a story just to ease someone's fears." She sighed. "Is that the sort of thing a mother does?" "Yes," I answered softly. "At least, a mother like her." Her head, streaked with red from the sunset, dropped lower. "I wish that I had known my own mother, and that I had heard some of her stories I could remember right now." "I'm sorry you didn't have that, Rhea. I tried to swallow but couldn't. But there is one thing almost as good as hearing stories from your mother." "Yes?" "Hearing stories from your friend." She nearly smiled. "I would love that." I glanced at the first star shimmering overhead. Then I cleared my throat and began. "Once, long ago, there lived a wise and powerful goddess by the name of Athena. Chapter 30. Baylor. Night fell cold and dark. Although after my story Rhea had seemed to drift off to sleep, I continued to lie awake, turning over and over on the rocks. For a while I watched the westernmost sky, recalling Guri of the golden hair, but mostly I stared at the ghostly remnant of the waning crescent moon above our heads. In the morning, at most 2 days would remain. Throughout the night I shivered from the chill air of these treeless hills, and from the thought of that merciless eye whose merest glance meant death. The vision that I had seen in the lake of the face stalked me. When I dozed, which wasn't much, I struggled and flailed. I awoke as the first rays of light touched the rock-strewn slope. No chirping birds or scurrying beasts greeted this dawn. Only wind, howling in long, lonely gusts across the ridges. Stiffly I stretched, the place between my shoulders throbbing painfully. I bent to the clear pool, which wore a delicate collar of ice, and took a last drink. Cold, hungry, and grim, we set off. Rhea strode solemnly over the spiky rocks, her bark shoes blackened by charcoal. Wordlessly, she led us in the direction of the sunrise. Yet none of us paused to savor the rich bands of orange and pink that were spreading across the horizon. Absorbed in our own thoughts, we continued to trek in silence. Several times the loose rocks gave way beneath my feet, sending me sliding backward. Once I fell over, slicing my knee on a rock. Late that morning, as we reached the top of another slope, Rhea slowed her pace. She halted, casting me a worried glance. Without a word, she raised her arm, pointing to the next ridge. A great gouge split the crest, looking as if the jaws of a mythic beast had clamped down on it ages ago, ripping away the very rocks. Even as I stared at the gouge, it seemed to stare back. I chewed my lip, certain that the other-world well stood on that spot. Why hadn't the mighty Dogda simply descended from on high and struck Baylor down? Surely, as the greatest warrior of all, he could have easily done so. Perhaps Dogda was fully occupied with battling Rita Gower himself. Or perhaps he didn't want mere mortals to enter the otherworld, whatever their reasons. I took the lead. Rhea stayed at my heels, so close that I could hear her anxious breathing behind me. As we dropped down into the next scorched valley, I found myself scanning the rubble for any sign at all of something green, something living. But no springs bubbled here, no moss filled the cracks. The rocks lay as bare as my own hopes. Slowly we climbed toward the great gorge. When at last we reached its very edge, Rhea grabbed the sleeve of my tunic. For several seconds she probed me with her gaze. Then, her voice a whisper, she spoke her first words of the day. "The eye. You mustn't look into the eye." I clasped the hilt of my sword. "I'll do my best." "Merlin, I wish we'd had a little more time for sharing days and sharing secrets." I furrowed my brow, unsure of what she meant, but there was no time now to find out. Setting my jaw, I handed her my staff. Then I marched into the gouge. As I stepped between the dark cliffs that rose sharply to either side, I felt as if I was striding into the open mouth of a monster. Pinnacles as jagged as the dragon's teeth jutted from the rims of the cliffs. A frigid wind slapped my face, screaming in my ears. As I moved deeper into the gorge, the air quivered ominously, as if shaken by footsteps that I could neither see nor hear. Yet I found nothing else. But for the jagged black rocks shining in the morning light, the place seemed utterly empty. No Baylor, no stairwell, no sign of anything living. All dead. Thinking I might have missed something, I started to turn, when all of a sudden the wind lashed me again. The air before me darkened, then quivered. This time, however, it parted like an invisible curtain. Out of the air itself stepped a huge, muscled warrior, standing at least twice my own size. Balor. Towering above me, he seemed almost as broad as the cliffs themselves. His deep, wrathful growl echoed within the great gouge as his heavy boots slammed down on the rocks. Slowly, he lifted his gleaming sword. I caught sight of the horns above his ears and the dark brow over his one enormous eye, before turning my second sight aside. I must look at something else, not his head. The sword. I'll try the sword. Barely had I focused on his broad, gleaming blade than it clashed against my own. My arm reeled from the powerful blow. To my surprise, the ogre grunted at the impact, as if the magic of my own sword had caught him off guard. Again he growled, then swung his weapon with even more force. I leapt to the side, just as his blade crashed against the rocks where I had stood only a split second before. Sparks flew into the air, singeing my tunic. As if the blurred edges of my second sight weren't enough of a disadvantage, I could not look directly at him for fear of glimpsing his eye. As the ogre raised his arm to strike again, I thrust at him, but he spun away in time. Pivoting with uncanny speed, he charged straight at me, his sword slashing the air. Caught by surprise, I backed away. Suddenly, my heel struck a rock. I hopped backward, trying desperately to keep my balance, but tumbled over in a heap. Balor released a vengeful snarl as he marched toward me, lifting his sword high. It was all I could do to avoid looking into his face. His eye. At that instant, Rhea sprinted out of the shadows and threw herself at the ogre. She lunged at his leg, holding tight to his thigh. He tried to kick free, but she continued to cling to him. This distracted him just long enough for me to roll to the side and leap to my feet. Before I could renew the attack, however, Balor roared angrily at Rhea. He seized her by the arm, ripping her loose. Then, roaring again, he whipped her around and hurled her headlong at the cliff wall. Face first, she slammed into the rocks. She staggered backward, then slumped motionless on the ground. My heart split in two at the sight. Just then, Bumblebee emerged from hiding and ran to her side, waving his arms wildly. Seething with rage, I charged straight at the ogre, swinging my sword while still averting my gaze. Yet Balor sidestepped me with ease. His fist smashed into my shoulder, sending me sprawling. The sword flew out of my hand and clattered on the rocks. I crawled madly after it. A huge boot kicked me in the chest. I flew through the air and landed with a thud on my back. My ribs screamed with pain. The pinnacles of the cliff seemed to wobble and whirl above me. Before I could try to sit up, Balor's immense hand closed around my throat. He squeezed until I gagged. Then, with a sharp jerk, he lifted me into the air. My head swam. I flailed my arms and legs, swaying helplessly. But he only squeezed tighter, throttling me. I pounded on his arm, trying desperately to breathe. Slowly, he lowered me until our faces almost touched. His grip tightened, his snarl tore at my ears. Then, pulled by a spell I no longer had the strength to resist, I looked into his dark eye. Like a pit of quicksand, it drew me in. With all my remaining power, I fought to break free, but I couldn't resist the eye. It pulled me deeper, deeper, sucking out my strength. Darkness shrouded my vision. I felt myself go limp. I should just give in. Just let go. I stopped trying to fight, stopped trying to breathe. Suddenly, I heard Balor roar in agony. He released my throat. I fell onto the rocks, coughing and gasping. Air filled my lungs again. The darkness clung to me for another moment, then faded away. Weakly, I raised myself up on one elbow, just in time to see Balor collapse on the rocks. He fell with the force of a toppled tree. From his back protruded a sword. My sword. And standing behind him was Rhea, half her face bloody. Her neck bent strangely, as if she couldn't straighten it. Then her own legs gave out, and she crumpled next to the fallen ogre. "Rhea!" I called hoarsely, crawling to her side. Bumblebee appeared, looking grimmer than grim. He lifted me by the arm so that I could stand. As I stumbled over to Rhea, I heard him moan.
"I told her she'd kill herself if she moved, but she wouldn't listen."
I knelt by her side, gently lifting her head with my hands. I tried to straighten her neck. Above one ear, I found a deep gash. It bled profusely, staining her suit of woven vines as well as the rocks. Carefully, I sprinkled some of the herbs from my satchel on the wound. "Rhea, I'll help you." Her blue-grey eyes opened halfway. "Merlin," she whispered. "This time, there's nothing you can do." "No," I shook my head vigorously. "You're going to be all right." With difficulty, she swallowed. "It's my time to die. I'm sure. When I looked in the lake of the face, I saw you fighting Balor and losing, but I also saw one of us dying. It wasn't you. It was me." Holding her, I tried to pour strength into her head and neck. I tore off the bottom of my sleeve and pressed it against her skin, willing the gash to heal as I had willed her bone to knit itself together in Eagle's Canyon. Yet I knew that these injuries were far more severe than a broken arm. Even the torn vines of her garb seemed to be fading a little with each passing second, their vibrant green showing hints of shadows. "It doesn't have to be that way, Rhea." "Oh, yes, it does. I never told you, but I was told a long time ago that my life would be lost to spare yours, that staying with you would mean my own death. I wasn't sure to believe it until now." "What nonsense!" I concentrated harder on the wounds, but the blood continued to flow, soaking the cloth and seeping through my fingers. "What fool ever told you such a thing?" "No fool. Our bossa. That's why you were never welcome inside the door." I winced. "Oh, you can't die now. Not because of some foolish prophecy." I bent lower. "Listen to me, Rhea. These prophecies are worthless. Worthless! A prophecy said that only a child of human blood could kill Balor, right? Well, you saw what happened. Balor had me in his death grip. I was helpless. I, the child of human blood. It was you, not me, who killed him. That's because I, too, have human blood." "What? You're a Finkyran. You're—" "Merlin." Rhea's eyelids quivered as the wind wailed beneath the cliffs. "I am your sister." I felt as if Balor's boot had once again slammed into my ribs. "My what?" "Your sister." She drew a difficult breath.
Helen is my mother, too. That's another reason I had to come.
I pounded the black rocks with my fist. It can't be true!
It is true,
declared Bumblebee. He bent his lanky frame to kneel beside me.
When Elaine of the Sapphire Eyes gave birth to you in a wrecked ship somewhere on our shores, she also gave birth a few minutes later to a daughter. She named the boy Emrys and the girl Rhiannon. The bards of Finkyra all know that story.
His glum sigh melted into the wind.
And also the story of how that daughter was lost as an infant. Her parents were travelling through Druma Wood when they were attacked by a band of warrior goblins, the soldiers of Rita Gower. A fierce battle ensued. The goblins finally scattered, but in the turmoil, one of Elaine's twins, the girl, was lost. Hundreds of people searched for weeks without success, until at long last, even Elaine stopped looking. Heartbroken, all she could do was pray to Dogda that her daughter might someday be found.
Rhea nodded weakly.
And she was, by a treeling, Cuin. It was she who brought me to Arbasa. My sister.
Tears welled in my sightless eyes. You are my sister.
Yes, Merlin.
If the towering cliffs had caved in and crushed me just then, I would have felt no greater pain. I had found my only sibling, and yet, as had happened so many times before, I was about to lose what I had only just found. Tuatha, I remembered now, had warned me that the prophecy about a child of human blood could have an unexpected meaning. It may be true, and it may be false. Yet even if it is true, the truth often has more than one face. How could I possibly have known that it would be the face of Rhea? Why? I asked in a quavering voice. Didn't you tell me before?
I didn't want you to change your course, to try to protect me. What you do with your life is important.
Your life is just as important. I threw away the bloody rag and tore a new piece off my sleeve. Even as I tried to mop the gash, I recalled a night long ago in Carepray's room full of books. So this was why he had hesitated so strangely in telling me the story of my birth. I had suspected then, and knew now, that he was on the verge of telling me something more. That a sister had been born on that same night. I cradled Rhea's head in my lap, feeling her warm breath on my arm. Her eyelids had nearly closed. The shadows on her garb deepened. As a tear slid down my cheek, I said, "If only I could have seen." Her eyelids fluttered.
Seen? Are you talking about your eyes?
No, no. I watched the blood dripping from her brown curls. This isn't about my eyes. It's about something else. Something my heart has known all along. That you are, well, more than someone I just happened to meet that day in Druma Wood. My heart knew that from the very start." She made a slight movement with her lips that could have been a grin. "Even when I hung you up in that tree, even then, Rhea, my heart could see it, but my head just didn't understand. I should have paid more attention to my heart, I'm telling you. The heart can see things invisible to the eye." A blue flash erupted from the rocks where Rhea had left my staff. Without even looking, I knew that it bore a new marking in the shape of an eye. For I had discovered, somehow, the soul of seeing. Yet my gain paled in comparison to my loss. In that same instant, the air began to shimmer near the outstretched arm of the fallen ogre. The invisible curtain parted, revealing a low circle of polished white stones. A well. Not a stairwell leading up, but a deep well leading down. I could see it, and I also understood, for the first time, that the pathway to the other world, to heaven and also to hell, meant going down, not up, down into the very deepest places, not up to somewhere in the universe, far removed from myself. The bitter wind swept over us, howling. Rhea spoke so faintly that I could hardly hear her. "You will be a wizard, Merlin. A good one." I lifted her head to my chest. "Don't die, Rhea. Don't die." She shuddered. Her eyes closed at last. I held her tight, sobbing quietly. Then, as if the dawn were breaking within my very arms, I sensed the presence of something that I had not noticed before. Something within Rhea's body, yet apart from it as well. Passing through my fingers like a breeze of light. Her spirit, leaving her body on its way to the realm beyond. In a flash, an idea seized me. I called to her spirit. "Please, Rhea, don't leave me. Not yet." I pulled her head close to my heart. "Come with me. Stay with me. Just for a while." I glanced toward the circle of white stones, the entry to the other world, the pathway to Dagda. Even if it were too late for him to save Hélène, maybe, just maybe, he could still save Rhea. And if not, at least we might be together for a little while longer. "Come with me, please." I inhaled deeply, drawing far more than air. And with that breath, a powerful new feeling flooded into me. It was vibrant. It was robust. It was Rhea. I turned to Bumblebee, whose drooping cheeks showed the streaks of his own tears. "Help me up, will you?" Solemnly he eyed me.
"She is dead."
Dead? I felt the new life force within me. But not gone, my good jester. With difficulty, Bumblebee helped me to my feet. In my arms I bore the empty body of Rhea, her head dangling. "Now bring me my sword and my staff." Shaking his head, the dour jester pulled the sword out of Baylor. He used his boots to wipe the blade clean. Then he gathered up my staff from the rocks. Returning to me, he slid my sword into its scabbard and the staff into my blood-soaked belt. He studied me somberly.
"Where are you going with her?"
"To the other world." His eyebrows lifted.
"Then I will wait here for you, even though you won't ever return."
I started toward the ring of white stones, then stopped and faced him again. "Bumblebee, in case I don't return, I want you to know something." He gave me a many-layered frown.
"What is that?"
"You are a terrible jester, but a loyal friend." With that, I turned toward the well. I strode across the rocks, my arms as heavy as my heart. Chapter 31. Into the Mist. A gust of warm air struck my face as I looked into the otherworld well. A spiraling stairway, made from the same polished stones as the entrance, dropped down from the center of the circle. I couldn't tell how far down the stairs went, though I suspected it was far indeed. Holding Rhea's limp body in my arms, I stepped carefully onto the first step. With a deep breath, perhaps my last, of Finkyran air, I started down the spiral. Downward I plunged, taking care not to stumble. As much as my ribs, throat, and shoulders ached from my battle with Balor, my heart ached still more to be bearing the body of my friend, my sister. After descending more than 100 steps, I noticed two surprising things. First, the well never grew any darker. Unlike it would in a drinking well or tunnel hollowed out of the ground, the light did not diminish at deeper levels. In fact, it seemed to grow stronger somehow. Soon the white stones of the stairs glowed with the luster of pearls. Second, the spiraling pathway did not need any walls. Only mist, curling and shifting, surrounded the stairs. The deeper I went, the more intricate and tangled the fingers of mist became. Sometimes they would twirl around my legs, or the curls of Rhea's hair. Other times they would condense and twist themselves into strange shapes I could not identify. The mist of this well reminded me of the mist surrounding Finkyra's shores, not so much a boundary or a barrier as a living substance possessing its own mysterious rhythms and patterns. Hélène had often spoken about in-between places like Mount Olympus, Iwidfa, or Finkyra, places not quite our world and not quite the other world, but truly in-between. In the same way that this mist was not really air and not really water, but something of both. And I thought of the day when, on the dirt floor of our hut in Gunid, she had described Finkyra to me for the first time. A place of many wonders, she had called it. Neither wholly of earth, nor wholly of heaven, but a bridge connecting both. As I dropped deeper into the mists, drawing nearer to the other world with every step, I wondered what kind of world it might be. If Finkyra were indeed the bridge, where then did the bridge lead? Spirits lived there, I knew that much, powerful ones like Dagda and Rita Gawa. But what of simpler, quieter spirits, like my brave friend Trouble? Did they share the same terrain, or did they live elsewhere? Turning endlessly on itself, the spiral stairway led me downward. It struck me that there might be no difference between day and night in this world. Without the sunrise or sunset, or the moon sailing overhead, it would be difficult to tell time. There might not even be any time, or what I would call time. I vaguely remembered Hélène saying something about two kinds of time. Historical time, which runs in a line, where mortal beings march out their lives, and sacred time, which flows in a circle. Could the other world be a place of sacred time? And if so, did that mean that time there turned in on itself, turning in circles like this spiraling stairway? I stopped, tapping my boot on one of the steps. If there was a different kind of time in this world, I could return to the surface, if I ever did return, too late to save Hélène. I might easily spend my 2 remaining days, and months besides, without even knowing it. I arched my back, lifting Rhea higher on my arms. Her weight, like the weight of my quest, felt heavier than ever. All I could do was try to find Dagda as soon as possible. Let nothing delay me or throw me off course. I started again down the stairs. As I followed the well deeper, something about the mist began to change. Instead of hovering close to the stairs as it had near the entrance, the mist pulled farther away, opening into pockets of ever-changing shapes. Before long, the pockets expanded into chambers, and the chambers widened into hollows. With each step downward, the misty vistas broadened, until I found myself in the middle of an immensely varied, constantly shifting landscape. A landscape of mist. In wispy traces and billowing hills, wide expanses and sharp pinnacles, the mist swirled about me. At some points I encountered canyons, cutting into the cloud-like terrain, running farther and deeper than I could guess. At other points I glimpsed mountains, towering in the distance, moving higher or lower, or both ways at once. I found misty valleys, slopes, cliffs, and caverns. Scattered throughout, though I couldn't be sure, moved shapes, or half-shapes, crawling or striding, or floating. And through it all, the mist curled and billowed, always changing, always the same. In time, I discovered that the stairs themselves had changed. No longer stiff and solid like stone, they rippled and flowed with everything around me. Although they remained firm enough to stand on, they were made from the same elusive fiber as the landscape. An uneasy feeling swelled in me, that what surrounded me was not really mist at all, that it was not even something physical, made from air or water, but something else, made from light, or ideas, or feelings. This mist revealed more than it obscured. It would take many lifetimes to comprehend even a little of its true nature. So this was what the other world was like. Layers upon layers of shifting, wandering worlds. I could plunge endlessly deeper on the stairs, move endlessly outward among the billows, or travel endlessly inward in the mist itself. Timeless, limitless, endless. Then, out of the flowing landscape, a shape appeared. Chapter 32. A Golden Bough. Small and grey, the shape rose aloft from a burgeoning hill. As I watched, it spread two misty wings. It sailed toward me, floating on a current, then suddenly changed directions, climbing so steeply that I almost lost sight of it. Abruptly, it veered and plunged straight downward, until it spun into a series of loops and turns that seemed to have no other purpose than the sheer joy of flight. Trouble! My heart leapt to watch the hawk fly again. Although my arms were wrapped around Rhea, I could still feel the leather satchel against my hip. Within it, along with my mother's herbs, rested a banded brown feather from one of Trouble's wings. Nothing more had remained of him after his battle with Rita Gower. Nothing, that is, save his spirit. Out of the billowing mists he came soaring to me. I heard his screech, as full of spunk and vigor as ever. I watched his final flying swoop as he approached. Then, with a rush of warm air, I felt his talons grip hold of my left shoulder. He folded his wings upon his back, prancing up and down my shoulder. Though his misty feathers had changed from brown to silver-grey, streaked with white, a touch of yellow still rimmed his eyes. He cocked his head toward me and gave a satisfied chirp. "Yes, Trouble, I'm happy to see you too!" Then my moment of gladness vanished, as I hefted the limp, blood-stained body in my arms. If only Rhea could as well. The hawk fluttered down to the leaf-draped girl's knee. He studied her for a moment, then piped a low, sombre whistle. With a shake of his head, he leapt back up to my shoulder. "I carry her spirit within me, Trouble. I'm hoping that Dogda might still be able to save her." I swallowed. "And also my mother." Suddenly, Trouble gave a loud shriek. His talons squeezed my shoulder, even as the mist before me billowed strangely. "Ah," said a slow, almost lazy voice from somewhere in the mist.
How nice, how terribly nice of you to come.
Trouble whistled anxiously. Who are you? I called into the clouds. Show yourself.
I intend to do just that, young man, in a moment's time.
The mist before me swirled like soup in a gently stirred bowl.
And I also have a gift for you, a terribly precious gift, oh yes.
Something about the voice's slow, relaxed tones made me feel a bit more at ease. Yet a vague sensation from some place within me made me feel more cautious than ever. Better, I decided, to err on the side of caution. I adjusted Rhea's weight in my arms. I haven't time for manners right now. If you have something to give me, then show yourself.
Ah, young man. So impatient, so terribly impatient.
The mist churned.
But you needn't worry. I shall heed your request in just a moment's time. You see, I'd like to be your friend.
At that, Trouble gave a shrill whistle. With a powerful flap of his wings, he lifted off from his perch. He whistled again, circled me once, and flew off, disappearing in a cloud of mist.
You have no need to fear me, murmured the voice, even though your hawk friend certainly seems to.
Trouble doesn't fear anything.
Ah, then I must be mistaken. Why do you think he flew away?
I swallowed, peering into the flowing mist. I don't know. He must have had a good reason. I turned back to the spot from which the voice seemed to come. If you'd like to be my friend, then show me who you are. Quickly, I need to keep going. The mist bubbled slowly.
Oh, so you have an important meeting, have you?
Very.
Well, then, that is what you must do. Oh, yes.
The voice sounded so relaxed as to be sleepy.
I'm sure you know how to get wherever you're going.
Instead of answering, I searched the billowing mist for Trouble. Where had he gone? We had only just met again, and I'd hoped that he might be able to lead me to Dogda.
Because if you don't, continued the soothing voice, my gift may be useful to you. Terribly useful. Oh, I offer you the gift of serving as your guide.
That feeling of caution from whatever source rose in me again. Yet perhaps this person, when he finally revealed himself, could really show me the way through the swirling clouds. It could save precious time. I shifted my weight on the misty step. Before I can accept your offer, I need to know who you are.
In a moment's time, young man, in a moment's time.
The voice yawned, then spoke as gently as the wisps of mist that brushed against my cheek.
Young people are in such a hurry, such a great hurry.
Despite my doubts, something about the voice made me feel increasingly relaxed, almost comfortable. Or maybe I was just feeling tired. My back ached. I wished I could set Rhea down somewhere, just for a moment.
Ah, you bear a heavy burden, young man.
Another agonizingly slow yawn.
Would you allow me to lighten your load just a little?
Against my will, I too yawned.
I'm fine, thank you.
But if you'd like to guide me to Dogda, I will let you. I caught myself. First, though, show me who you are.
To Dagda, is it? Ah, the great and glorious Dagda, warrior of warriors. He lives far, terribly far from here. Still, I would be pleased to guide you. I straightened my stiff back. Can we go now? I'm running out of time. In a moment's time. Curling arms of mist swayed before my face. It's a pity, though, you can't take a little rest. You look as if you could use one. Still holding Rhea, I crouched down, resting her on my thighs. I wish I could, but I must get going. Whatever you say, yes. The voice gave the longest, sleepiest yawn yet. We shall leave directly. In a moment's time. I shook my head, which felt strangely clouded. Good. Now, you were going to do something first. What was it? Oh, yes. Show yourself before I follow you. Why, of course, young man. I am almost ready. The voice heaved a slow, relaxed sigh. It will be pleasing, terribly pleasing to help you. The feeling of caution nudged me again, but I ignored it. I moved the arm that had supported Rhea's thighs, resting my hand on a damp step. I wondered how it might feel to sit down, if only briefly. Surely a little rest couldn't hurt? That's right, young man, purred the voice's soothing tone. Just let yourself relax. Relax, I thought dreamily. Just let myself relax. Yes, the voice sighed sleepily. You are a wise young man, so much wiser than your father. I nodded, feeling half dazed. My father, wiser than... The feeling of caution surged through me. How did he know my father? I yawned again. Why worry about my father now? He wasn't anywhere near the other world. My head felt foggy, as if the mist surrounding me had somehow flowed into my ears. What was I in such a hurry about, anyway? A little rest would help me remember. Crouching on the stairs, I lowered my head against my chest. Once again, so weakly that I could barely detect it, the feeling of caution pricked me. Wake up, Merlin. He's not your friend. Wake up. I tried to ignore it, but couldn't quite do so. Trust in your instincts, Merlin. I stirred, raising my head slightly. There was something familiar about that feeling, that voice inside me, as if I had heard it somewhere before. Trust in your instincts, Merlin. Trust in the berries. With a sudden jolt, I awoke. It was Rhea's voice, Rhea's wisdom. Her spirit was sensing what I was not. I shook the fog from my head. Taking my hand from the step, I wrapped it tightly around Rhea's legs. With a grunt, I slowly stood up again. Ah, young man. An edge of concern had crept into the sleepy voice. I thought you might rest a little while. Clutching Rhea firmly in my arms, the leaves drying but still soft against my hands, I drew a deep breath. I am not going to rest. I am not going to let you lull me into enchanted sleep. For I know who you are. Ah, you do?
Yes, I do. Rita Gower. The mist started to froth like a boiling pot. It bubbled and whirled before me. Out of the swirling vapors stepped a man, as tall and broad as Baylor, wearing a flowing white thin necklace of gleaming red stones. His hair, as black as my own, lay perfectly combed on his head. Even his eyebrows looked exquisitely groomed. It was his eyes, though, that caught my attention. They seemed utterly hollow, as vacant as the void. As much as the memory of Baylor's deadly eye made me shudder, these eyes frightened me more. Rita Gower lifted one hand to his lips and licked the tips of his fingers. I could have taken any number of forms. His voice, harsh and snapping, held none of the lazy tones I had heard before. The wild boar is one of my favorites, complete with the scarred foreleg. We all carry scars, you know. He stroked one eyebrow with his wet fingers. But you have seen the wild boar before, haven't you? Once on the shore of that rock pile you call Gooneed, and once again in a dream. How? Perspiration formed on my brow as I recalled the dream, and the feeling of dagger-like tusks growing into my very eyes. How do you know about that? Oh, come now. Surely a would-be sorcerer has learned at least a little about leaping. He licked his fingertips as his lips curled in a smirk. Sending dreams to people is one of my few amusements. A brief distraction from my many labors. The smirk expanded. Though there is something I enjoy even more. Send the death shadow. I tensed, squeezing Rhea's lifeless form. What gave you the right to strike down my mother? Rita Gower's vacant eye. What gave you the right to bring her to Finkyra? I didn't mean a little touch of hubris. He ran his hand over his scalp, patting the hairs into place. That was your father's fatal flaw, and your grandfather's as well. Did you really expect to be any different? I straightened up. I am different. Hubris again. I thought you would have learned by now. The white tunic fluttered as he took a step toward me. Hubris will bring your death. That is certain. It has already brought your mother's. I reeled, staggering on the misty step. That's why you delayed me all this time. But of course. He licked his fingertips with care, one at a time. And now that you know you have failed to prevent her death, the death that you yourself brought on, I shall relieve you of any further misery. I shall kill you, here and now. I backed up one step, trying not to stumble. Rita Gower laughed while he stroked his other eyebrow. Your hero, Doctor, isn't here to save you this time as he did on Gooneed. Nor is that fool bird, whose rashness prevented me from finishing you off at the shrouded castle. This time, I have you. He took another step through the mist toward me. His enormous hands flexed as if they were preparing to crush my skull. Just so you know the extent of your folly, your hubris, let me explain something to you. If only you hadn't tried to avoid your lessons, you might know that if only you had worn a mantle of mistletoe, that cursed golden bough, you could have traveled straight to Dogda's lair. I could not have waylaid you as I have. I blanched, remembering Rhea's plea to take a bough of mistletoe with me to the other world, and I had dismissed her advice out of hand. Once again Rita Gower smirked. Arms of mist sprouting out of his head clawed at me. I do so love arrogance, one of humanity's most endearing qualities. His hollow eyes narrowed. So much for your lessons. Now, you shall die. At that instant, a winged shape shot out of the clouds. A screech echoed across the shifting landscape of mist, even as Trouble soared straight at me. Behind him he trailed a loose, flowing bough of gold. Mistletoe! Rita Gower roared with rage and leapt at me. Only a fraction of a second before he could seize me, the golden bough fell over my shoulders like a cape. I felt his powerful hands closing on my throat. Suddenly I became vapor, dissolving into the mist. The last thing I felt was a pair of talons grasping my shoulder, and the last thing I heard was the wrathful cry of Rita Gower. You have escaped me once again, you runt of a wizard. You will not be so fortunate next time. Chapter 33. Wondrous Things. Skin, bone, and muscles dissolved. Instead, I consisted of air, water, and light, plus something more. For now I belonged to the mist. Rolling like a cloud of vapor, I stretched my limitless arms before me. As the golden bough of mistletoe propelled me along the hidden pathways to Dagda's home, I swirled and swayed, melting into the air even as I moved beyond it. Through the spiraling tunnels and twisting corridors of mist I flew. And while I couldn't see them, I could sense that Trouble and Rhea, in whatever form, traveled with me. Too many times to count, I glimpsed other landscapes and creatures within the vapors. Boundless variety seemed to inhabit each and every particle of mist. Worlds within worlds, levels within levels, lives within lives. The other world, in all its vastness and complexity, beckoned. Yet I had no time now to explore. Elaine's life, and Rhea's as well, hung in the balance. I might have lost my chance to help one or both of them, thanks to my own supreme folly. Even so, as Rhea herself had declared when my staff vanished in Slantos, as long as you still have hope, you still have a chance. And hope remained with me, though it seemed no more substantial than the shifting clouds. My thoughts, rolling like the very mist, turned to Dagda. I felt a deep pang of fear at the prospect of facing the greatest of all the spirits. While I expected that he would judge me harshly for my many mistakes, would he also refuse to help? Perhaps saving my mother's life would disturb some delicate cosmic balance that only he understood. Perhaps he would simply not have time to see me. Perhaps he would not be in his realm at all when I arrived, and instead be somewhere far away, in this misty world or another, battling the forces of Rita Gower. I wondered what so powerful a spirit would look like. Surely, like Rita Gower, he could assume any form he chose. When he had appeared on the day I washed ashore on the coast of Gunid, he had come as a stag, immense, powerful, with a great rack of antlers. What had struck me the most, though, were his eyes. Those brown, unblinking pools had seemed as deep and mysterious as the ocean itself. Whatever form he might take, I knew it would be as strong and imposing as Dagda himself. A stag in human form, perhaps. What had Rita Gower called him? The great and glorious Dagda, warrior of warriors. Like a cloud flowing into a hollow in the hills, My forward motion slowed, little by little, until finally it stopped. Then, imperceptibly at first, the mist around me started to dissipate. Slowly, very slowly, it thinned and shredded, pulling apart like a wispy veil. Gradually I could discern the outline of a tall, towering form behind the veil. Dark and brooding, it hovered before me. All at once, the remaining mist melted away. The towering form, I realized, was actually an enormous, dew-coated tree, as tall and mighty as our boss aide stood, with one prominent difference. This tree stood upside down. Its massive roots reached upward, disappearing into the tangled threads of mist. They curled majestically around the clouds, as if they embraced the entire world above. From these soaring roots hung countless boughs of golden mistletoe, swaying gracefully. Down below, at the base of the trunk, burly branches stretched across a wide plain of steaming mist. And the entire tree, covered with thousands upon thousands of dewdrops, sparkled like the surface of a dancing stream. So captivated was I by the sight of the tree that it took me a moment to realize that I, too, stood on the misty plain. My body had returned. Rhea slumped in my arms, while Trouble made soft, gurgling sounds in my ear. A bough of mistletoe, just like the ones dangling above me, draped over my shoulders. My sword hung at my side, while the staff still rode under my belt. I looked into Trouble's yellow-rimmed eyes. "Thanks, my friend. You saved me once again." The hawk released a high, almost embarrassed whistle, and fluttered his grey wings.
"Welcome to the Tree of Soul."
I spun to face the source of the weak, unsteady voice. It came from a frail old man whose right arm dangled uselessly at his side. Although he sat on the floor of mist, leaning against the branches, he was so small and slight that I had not noticed him at all before. His silver hair glistened like the dew-covered bark around him. "Thank you, very much." I spoke stiffly, not wanting to be fooled again. Still, with time so scarce, I had no choice but to be direct. "I am looking for Dagda." Trouble's talons pinched my shoulder. He squawked at me reproachfully. The old man smiled gently, soft lines crinkling his face. Laying his withered arm across his lap, he studied me intently. Suddenly, I noticed his eyes, deep brown pools, full of compassion, wisdom, and sadness. I had seen them before, on the great stag. "Dagda." I bit my lip, gazing at the frail little man. "I am sorry I didn't recognize you." The elder's smile faded.
"You did, in time. Just as you may, in time, come to know the true source of my power. Or do you already?"
I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I know nothing, I'm afraid, about your power's true source. But I believe that you use it to help living things take their own course, whatever that may be. That's why you helped me on the day I washed ashore."
"Very good, Merlin. Very good."
His brown eyes sparkled with satisfaction, and a touch of annoyance.
"Even if you did try to avoid one of the songs?"
I shifted uncomfortably. He examined me, as if he could see into my deepest heart of hearts.
"You carry a great load, in addition to the friend in your arms. Here, lay her down beside me."
Can you help her?"
"We shall see."
His brow, already webbed with wrinkles, creased some more.
"Tell me of the songs, Merlin. Where does the soul of each lie?"
"And my mother? If she has any time left, it isn't much."
"She, too, must wait."
Stooping on the vaporous ground, I gently laid the body of my sister beside Dogda. Curls of mist flowed over her shoulders and across her chest, covering her like a wispy blanket. He glanced at her, looking profoundly sad, then returned his gaze to me.
"First, show me your staff."
Trouble clucked with admiration as I drew the staff out of my belt. I held the knotted top toward Dogda, twirling the shaft slowly. All of the markings, as deep blue as the dusk, gleamed before us. The butterfly, symbol of transformation. The pair of hawks, bound together in flight. The cracked stone, reminding me of the folly of trying to cage the light flyer. The sword, whose name I knew well. The star inside a circle, calling back the luminous laughter of Guri of the golden hair. The dragon's tail, which somehow reminded my tongue of the taste of soiled leather. And last of all, the eye, so different from Balor's, yet in its own way, just as terrifying. Dogda nodded.
"You carry a sword now, I see."
I patted the silver hilt.
"Guard it well, for the destiny of that sword is to serve you until the time comes for you to place it into a scabbard of stone. Then it shall pass to a boy no older than you are now. A boy born to be king, whose reign shall thrive in the heart long after it has withered on the land."
"I will guard it well."
"Tell me now, my son, what melodies have you heard within the 7 songs? Start with the first one, changing."
I cleared my throat. "I learned from a butterfly, and from a traitor, a treeling, who redeemed herself, that all of us, all living things, have the potential to change." The old man studied me intently.
"It is no accident that this was your first song, Merlin. I believe you have been hearing its strains for some time."
"Yes." I looked into the dewy boughs for a moment. "I see now why the Greek words for butterfly and soul are the same."
"Good. Now tell me about binding."
I glanced at Rhea's face, pale and still. "The strongest bonds are of the heart. I learned it from watching a pair of hawks soaring together." Trouble pranced proudly across my shoulder, preening his wings.
"And from a trickster, perhaps?"
I sighed. "That too." A shred of mist passed over Dogda's left hand. With a deft twirl of his fingers, he wove the mist into a complex knot. Then, with a pensive nod, he let it drift away. His gaze returned to me.
"Next you found your way into the underground realm of my old friend Urnalda. She is wiser than she appears, I can assure you. No doubt she enjoyed the chance to be your teacher."
I shook my head. "I'm not sure how much. I was a rather slow learner. Eventually, though, with the help of a light flyer, I finally found the soul of that song."
"Which is?"
I pointed to the image of the cracked stone. "The best way to protect something is to set it free." Dogda leaned back, gazing upward into the burly roots of the tree of soul. As he raised an eyebrow, a curl of mist spiraled up the trunk.
"The next lesson, I believe, came as a surprise for you."
"Naming. It took a while, and a broken bread knife, to teach me that a true name holds true power." I paused, thinking. "Is my true name Merlin?" The elder shook his silvery head. "Then would you perhaps know my true name?"
"I know it."
"Would you tell me?" Dogda considered my request for a while.
"No."
Not yet. But I will do this. If we should meet again at a happier time, when you have won over the most powerful enemy of all, then I will tell you your true name."
I blanched. The most powerful enemy of all? You must mean Rita Gower.
"Perhaps."
He pointed to the star within a circle.
"Now leaping."
"That's an amazing skill. The Grandalusa used it to send us all the way to the land of the Treelings. Guri of the golden hair used it too, to give Rhea a vision of the other world well." My voice lowered, and Rita Gower used it to send the death shadow to my mother. The silver eyebrows lifted.
"To your mother?"
My boots shifted uneasily on the misty ground. Well, no. To me. But it felled my mother instead.
"So what is the soul of the art of leaping?"
My attention turned to the flowing mist that surrounded us. Gracefully, it wound its way around Dagda and myself, touching both of us as it touched the upside-down tree, embracing the great roots that themselves embraced the world above. Everything, I declared, is connected to everything else.
"Good, my son, good. Now, what of eliminating?"
That one I learned from a sleeping dragon, and from a jester. I grinned slightly. They showed me that every living thing is precious somehow. Dagda leaned toward me.
"Even a dragon?"
Even a dragon. He stroked his chin thoughtfully.
"You will meet that dragon again, I believe, when it awakens."
I caught my breath. Before I could ask anything, however, he spoke again.
"Seeing. Tell me now about seeing."
My tongue worked against my cheek before any words came. At last, in a voice not much louder than a whisper, I said, "The heart can see things invisible to the eye."
What else?"
I thought for a moment. Well, now that I know a little about seeing with the heart, I can, perhaps, see better into myself. Dagda's deep brown eyes regarded me.
"And when you look into that place, my son, what do you see?"
I cleared my throat, started to speak, then stopped myself. Searching for the right words, I paused before starting again. It's like going down into the other world well. The deeper I go, the more I discover. Turning away, I said under my breath, "And what I discover can be truly frightening." The old man watched me with compassion.
"What else do you see?"
I heaved a sigh. How little I really do know. Dagda reached toward me, taking my hand in his own.
"Then, Merlin, you have learned something invaluable."
He drew me nearer on the floor of mist. Shreds of vapor curled about us both.
"Truly invaluable. Until now, you have been searching for the souls of the songs, but knowing how little you really know, having humility, that, my son, is the soul of wizardry itself."
Puzzled, I cocked my head.
"In time, I believe, you will fully understand. For humility is nothing more than genuine respect for the wondrous, surprising ways of the world."
Slowly, I nodded. That sounds like something Rhea would say. Looking again at her lifeless form, I asked anxiously, "Can you still save her?" Dagda gave no answer. "Can you?" For an extended moment, he watched me in silence.
"I know not, my son.
My throat constricted as if Baylor still held me in his grasp. I have been such a fool. I've caused so much harm. Dagda pointed a finger at a rolling ribbon of mist, which instantly straightened. At the same time, he glanced at another wispy line, which suddenly changed into a tight little ball. Then, turning back to me, he smiled sadly.
So you have come to see both the dark and the light within yourself, the dragon as well as the star, the serpent as well as the dove.
I swallowed. When you first greeted me, you said I might come to know the true source of your power. Well, I'm not sure, but I think your power is quieter, subtler than other kinds. It is guided by your head and your hand, but it springs from your heart. Really, your power is about the seventh song, seeing not with the eyes, but with the heart. His eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. There was a time, I continued, my voice a mere whisper, when I would have given anything to see again with my own eyes. I still want to see that way again, very much, but now I know there are other ways to see. Lightly, Dagda squeezed my hand.
You see well, Merlin.
He released his grip, then observed me for a long moment.
And I will tell you this. As much pain as you have known, and are yet to know, wondrous things await you, young man. Truly wondrous things.
Chapter 34. Elixir. Dagda's deep eyes turned to the trunk of the tree, sparkling with diamonds of dew. He followed the column higher and higher to the gnarled roots that melted into the mist far above. His gaze lingered there momentarily, as if he could see through the mist into the lands beyond. At last he spoke.
Now for your friend, bound to you by love, as well as by blood.
He reached for Rhea, lying on the vaporous ground with his uninjured arm. She seemed so still, so silent, the colour drained from her skin as well as her garb of leaves. My stomach churned in anguish, for I suspected that her body had grown too cold for even the greatest of the spirits to revive. Hadn't Guri told me that Dagda, for all his power, could not bring back to life someone who had died? Ever so gently, he lifted her limp hand, closing his eyes as he did so. He seemed to be listening for something far away. Then, without opening his eyes, he gave me a command.
You may release her, Merlin.
I hesitated, suddenly fearing that this would surely mean her death. Once her spirit had left me, once it had flown, I could never hope to see her live again. As much as I yearned to hear her laugh again, still more I feared that by letting her go, I would lose her forever.
Merlin, repeated Dagda, it is time.
At last I released her. Deep within, I could feel her spirit stirring subtly. Then it began to flow out of me, at first like a trickle of water, gathering strength, until finally it felt like a river bursting through a dam. My sightless eyes brimmed with tears, for I knew that whether or not Rhea survived in mortal form, she and I would never be so utterly close again. Slowly, very slowly, I exhaled. Shreds of mist knitted themselves in the air between us, creating a shimmering bridge linking my chest and hers. The bridge hovered, glowing, for barely an instant before fading away completely. Just then I noticed the gash on the side of her head. It started closing, healing from within. As the skin pulled together, the bloodstains, now more brown than red, evaporated from her curly hair, her neck, and her suit of woven vines. Colour began to flow into her cheeks. Her garb softened as the green vitality returned to every leaf and stem. Rhea's forefinger trembled. Her neck straightened. Then, at last, her grey-blue eyes opened, along with Dagda's. Gazing up into the roots draped with mistletoe, she drew a halting breath of her own. Turning her face toward Dagda, she smiled, even as she burst into speech. "You live with a tree, just like I do." Her bell-like laughter rang out. I joined her, while Dagda erupted with a full, resonant laugh of his own. As he shook with mirth, the great tree, too, began to sway on the misty plain. Droplets of dew fell from above, spinning and shining in the air. Even Trouble, perched on my shoulder, piped a joyous whistle. It seemed to me that the universe itself had joined in our laughter. Her eyes alight, Rhea sat up and swung her head toward me. "Merlin, you did it. You saved me." "No, Dagda saved you." "Not without your help, young man." The elder pushed a few silver hairs off his brow. "By holding so lovingly her spirit as well as her body, you kept her from truly dying, long enough that I could still revive her." His gaze moved to Rhea. "And you helped too." "I did." The old man nodded slowly. "Your spirit is a radiant one, Rhiannon. Exceptionally radiant. You possess a force of life that is as powerful as the one I placed in one of the treasures of Finkyra, the Orb of Fire." Rhea's cheeks flushed. I recalled the glittering orange sphere that I had rescued from the ruins of the shrouded castle. "It has something to do with healing, doesn't it?" "Healing, yes, but of the soul, not of the body. For the Orb of Fire, in the hands of someone wise, can rekindle hope and joy, even the will to live." Dagda turned to me. "You, Merlin, know more than anyone how bright the spirit of your sister shines." I realized that I could still feel, deep within me, a touch of Rhea's spirit. A bit of my sister had remained with me, and I knew always would. "Yes," declared the frail, silver-haired man. "Your training as a wizard has only begun, yet embracing the wisdom as well as the spirit of your sister has been part of it, an important part." My 8th song, you could say. "Yes." I looked at Rhea. Ayla tried to tell me, but I didn't understand. Now, though, I think I have a glimmer. She touched her amulet. Or you could say, an instinct. Trouble made a clacking sound that resembled a laugh. Passing my hand through the mist rising from beneath us, I searched the face of Dagda. I have an instinct that Finkyra is my true home, and yet I have another instinct that it's not. Which one is right? The old man gave a sad smile. You are learning. Just as true love often melds both joy and grief, true instinct often mixes contrary feelings. In this case, though, I can help you. Humans are not meant to live long on Finkyra. As much as you have come to feel at home there, you must one day return to Earth. You may stay a while longer, for you still have work left to do, but ultimately you must leave. I bit my lip. Can't you just allow me to stay? Compassion in his eyes, Dagda shook his head. I could, but I will not. The worlds must remain apart, for each has its own fabric, its own spirit that must be honored. He sighed gravely.
That is why I am forced to wrestle with Ritagawa on so many fronts. He would pull apart the fabrics of Otherworld, Earth, and Finkyra in order to weave them into his own twisted design. He wants only to rule them all as his kingdom.
"Is that why the Finkyrans lost their wings?" asked Rhea, glancing at the swirling clouds. "They forgot how to honor the fabric?"
Your instincts are indeed strong, Rhiannon. You are on the right track, but the rest you must discover for yourself.
"Doctor, may I ask you something?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "There's a prophecy. It says that only a child of human blood can defeat Ritagawa or his servants. Is that true? And if it is the human child one of us?" The elder ran his hand over a sprig of mistletoe hanging nearby.
Though I cannot tell you all you wish to know, I can say this. The prophecy carries much weight. Yet while it was your sister who vanquished Baelor, the only person who can stop Ritagawa in Finkyra is you.
I tried to swallow, but my throat had tightened again. Suddenly I remembered the death shadow plunging down the throat of Hélène. When I spoke, it was in a whisper. "If I must die fighting Ritagawa, you must tell me this. Is there any way at all, that our mother can still live?" Rhea turned anxiously from me to Dagda. Trouble paced across my shoulder, fluttering his wings. The old man drew a long breath.
You still have time, though not much. Only a few hours remain before the moon's fourth quarter expires. And when it does, so will your mother.
"The elixir," I pleaded. "Can you give it to us?" Dagda reached down to a burly branch. Carefully, he touched one of the dewdrops with the end of his finger. As it came free, it covered his fingertip with a thin, glistening cup. Using his other fingers, he removed the cup. It sat upright in the palm of his hand, like a tiny, crystalline vial. He winced slightly. At the same instant, the little vial filled with a single drop of red fluid. Dagda's own blood. When the vial brimmed full, its mouth sealed tight.
There now.
He spoke thickly, as if he had been weakened by his act. Quivering slightly, he handed the vial to me.
Take it.
Even as I opened my leather pouch and placed the elixir inside, I felt Trouble's talons digging into my shoulder. The hawk nuzzled his soft feathers against my neck. Dagda knew my question before I could ask.
No, Merlin, he cannot join you. Your friend Trouble gave his mortal life at the Shrouded Castle to spare yours. He belongs here now.
The hawk whistled faintly. As the mist billowed around us, the gaze from his yellow-rimmed eyes met my own. We looked at each other for the last time. "I'll miss you, Trouble." The bird nuzzled my neck again, then slowly moved away. Dagda's expression, too, showed pain.
It may not lighten your heart now, Merlin, but I believe that one day, in another land, you will feel the grip of a different bird's talons on your shoulder.
I don't want a different bird.
I understand.
The elder stretched his one able hand toward me, brushing my cheek.
You must take separate paths now, I am afraid. Though no one knows all the turns those paths may take.
Not even you?
Not even me.
Dagda lifted the mantle of mistletoe from my shoulder.
Go now, my children, and be brave.
Trouble's final screech sounded in my ear, even as the swirling mist swept over me like a wave, swallowing everything. Chapter 35. A Wizard's Staff. The flash faded into darkness. The only light came from the sprinkling of stars overhead. I found myself still kneeling, with Rhea still sitting by my side. Yet jagged rocks and steep cliffs replaced the steaming mist. A circle of polished stones replaced the Tree of Soul. Not far away, the corpse of a huge warrior lay still and silent. I took Rhea's hand. "We're back at the well."
"Tro-tro, tro-tro, tro-tro."
The hunched figure of Bumblebee approached in the near darkness.
"I never thought you'd return. And I see you've brought back the body of—"
"Rhea," she interrupted, "alive and well." Bumblebee froze mid-step. Even in the dim light, I could see his eyes grow wider. Then, for a brief instant, his mouth and multiple chins turned upward ever so slightly. It lasted only a fraction of a second, yet I felt certain that he had actually smiled. I turned my gaze toward the sky, searching for any sign at all of the moon. Yet I could find nothing at all. I bit my lip. If only I hadn't wasted those precious minutes with Rita Gower. Rhea suddenly pointed to a faint glimmer of light that had just emerged from behind a cloud. "Oh, Merlin, that's all that's left of the moon. It will be gone before dawn." I leapt to my feet. "So will our mother, unless we can get to her first." "But how?" Rhea stood, facing the southern sky. "Our Barca is so far away." As if in answer, the entire ridge shook with a sudden tremor. Then came another, still stronger. Another. Rocks tumbled down from the cliffs on both sides of us. I pulled my walking stick out of my belt and leaned on it for balance. Then my second sight perceived a new shape rising on the horizon. Like a swiftly growing hill, it blocked out the stars behind. Yet I knew at once that this was no hill. "Shim!" I shouted. "We're over here!" A moment later, the giant's immense form towered above the three of us. As his feet crushed against the loose rocks, he lowered a great hand. Quickly, Rhea and I climbed into his palm, followed reluctantly by Bumblebee. Beneath his bulbous nose, Shim grinned crookedly.
"I is gladly to seize you."
"Seize us," moaned Bumblebee, his hands wringing his cape. "He's come to seize us."
"And we're glad to see you," I replied, ignoring the jester. "How did you know we needed you?" asked Rhea. "And where to find us?" Shim lifted his hand as he straightened himself. Though I tried to keep on my feet, I tumbled into the fleshy palm, barely missing the huddled form of Bumblebee. Rhea, for her part, sat down beside us with the grace of a landing swan.
"I is a sleepily dreamings of—"
The giant paused, pursing his enormous lips.
"I can't remembers. Anyways, the dream changes into a bird. A hawk, like the one who once rides on your shoulder, except he is all whitely gray instead of brown."
I cringed. I could feel the old pain between my shoulder blades, and another one besides.
"Then this hawk screeches at me so loudly I wakes up."
Shim scrunched his nose.
"With the powerfully feeling that I needs to find you, and most strangestly, a picture in my mind of where to go."
Rhea smiled. "Your dream was sent by Dagda." The giant's bushy eyebrows lifted. "You are a loyal friend, Shim. Now, take us to our Barca." I glanced at the trace of the remaining moon. It seemed even fainter than just a moment before. A bracing wind swept over us, blowing against my tunic as if it were a sail, as Shim turned and started lumbering back across the hills of the Lost Lands. In 3 or 4 strides, he scaled slopes that had taken us hours to climb, his hairy feet crunching on the rubble. No sooner had he reached a valley floor than he had nearly gained the next ridge. In minutes, a hint of smoke scented the air, and I knew we had reached the hollow of the sleeping dragon. As Shim veered south to cross the channel, sea fog swirled around us. His pink eyes gleamed.
"Didn't I tell you I hopes to make another crossing with you one day?"
His laughter rolled across the waves that slapped against his legs.
"Certainly, definitely, absolutely."
Yet none of us joined in his mirth. Bumblebee hugged his belly, muttering about the demise of a great jester. Rhea and I, meanwhile, studied the night sky, trying to keep track of the swiftly fading moon. By the sounds and smells that moved through the darkness, as well as the shifts in Shim's strides, I could sense some of the changes in terrain. After emerging from the channel, he marched over the rising coastal plain and swiftly mounted the hills. Soon his steps shortened as the grade steepened. We moved higher into the snowy ridges near the city of Varigel. At one point I thought I heard deep voices chanting in the distance, though the sound quickly died away. The alpine air grew misty and damp as we descended into a maze of hills and swamps. Somewhere near, I knew, lay the crystal cave of the Grande Elusa. Was the great spider there herself, curled up among the treasures of Finkyra? Or was she out prowling for wraiths and goblins to satisfy her limitless appetite? The crashing and snapping of limbs below announced our entry into Druma Wood. Rich, resiny smells tickled my nostrils. Immense shadows, some nearly as tall as the giant who bore us, pushed skyward. I couldn't help but recall Shim's ardent wish that he had confided in me so long ago. To be big as the highliest tree. His wish had been granted, to be sure. Sitting in the great palm, I stared all the harder at the dying moon, glimmering high above us. And I felt increasingly sure that my own deepest wish would not be granted. Just when I began to wonder whether I could still detect the moon at all, or whether I was only imagining its pale glow, a new shadow loomed before us, taller and fuller than the rest. It stood with all the grandeur of Dogda's Tree of Soul. Here at last rose Arbassa. In its immense branches, glowing like a star, sat the aerial cottage that held Hélène of the sapphire eyes. Shim bent low, placing his hand on the oak tree's burly roots. I grabbed my staff and leapt to the ground, followed closely by Rhea and a stumbling Bumblebee. With a shout of thanks, I turned to Arbassa, hoping that this time the tree would not resist allowing me to enter. At that instant, the enormous trunk made a low, grinding sound. The bark creased, cracked, and opened. I plunged through the doorway. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I bounded upward, not even bothering to glance at the runes carved on the walls. As I burst through the curtain of leaves at the top of the stairwell, Ixtma, the large-eyed squirrel, shrieked. He whirled around, dropping a bowl of water on the floor. Then, seeing Rhea come in just behind me, he scampered over to her, chattering noisily. Hélène, her eyes closed, lay on the floor just where we had left her. The same pine-scented pillow supported her head, while the same shimmering blanket covered her chest. Yet, as I set down my staff and knelt by her side, I could tell that much had changed. Her once creamy cheeks looked whiter than dried bones. Her brow showed the furrows of prolonged suffering. She seemed much thinner, as wispy as the vanishing moon. I lay my head upon her chest, hoping to hear the beating of her heart, but heard nothing. I touched her cracked lips, hoping to feel the slightest breath of air, but felt nothing. Rhea crouched beside me, her face nearly as pale as our mother's. She watched, motionless, as I reached into my satchel and removed the vial containing the elixir. Touched by the light from the hearth, it flashed with brilliant red, the color of Dagda's own blood. The whole room flooded with scarlet hues. Barely able to breathe myself, I dropped the elixir into my mother's mouth. "Please, Dagda, I beg of you, don't let it be too late. Don't let her die." I barely noticed when Ixtma whimpered, wrapping his bushy tail around Rhea's leg, or when Bumblebee entered the room shaking his head morosely, or when the first rays of dawn touched the leaves draping the eastern windows. Yet I noticed with every particle of my being when my mother opened her eyes. Seeing Rhea and me, she cried out in surprise. Rosy hues flared in her cheeks. Drawing a tentative breath, she weakly lifted a hand toward each of us. We clasped her hands in our own, squeezing the living flesh. Tears brimmed in my eyes, while Rhea sobbed quietly.
"My children,"
Rhea smiled through her tears.
"We're here now. Mother."
Elaine's brow creased slightly.
"Forgive me, child, for not telling you before you left. I thought that if I died, your pain would be too great. You didn't have to tell me."
Rhea touched the amulet of oak, ash, and thorn upon her chest.
"I already knew."
I nudged her and grinned. Whatever this girl knows about instincts, she learned from me. We laughed, mother and daughter and son, as if all our years of separation had never occurred. For even if someday hence we might be forced to part again, right now a single, unalterable truth filled our hearts. On this dawning day, in the boughs of this great tree, we sat together, reunited at last. Only after much more laughter and much more talk did we pause to eat a hearty breakfast of Ixtma's honey-soaked nuts and rosemary tea with plenty of mint. And only after my 5th helping did I catch sight of the glittering object resting by the hearth. The flowering harp, its magical strings aglow, leaned against the wall of living wood. Suddenly I caught my breath. Behind the harp, several more objects lay stacked. Staring at them with amazement, I licked the honey from my fingers, pushed myself up from the floor, and stepped closer. I couldn't believe it, yet I knew it was true. All of the treasures of Finkyra were here, right here in Rhea's cottage. There, gleaming darkly, sat the caller of dreams, the graceful horn that Caer Prey had once told me could stir any dream into life. Beside it rested the double-edged sword Deeper Cut. When I reached to touch its hilt, the powerful blade hanging on my belt rang softly, reminding me that my sword, too, had been wrought to fulfill a remarkable destiny. Next to the twining branches of the wall rested the fabled plough that could till its own field. Beside it stood the hoe that nurtures its own seeds, the saw that cuts only as much wood as is needed, and the rest of the wise tools, except, of course, the one that had been lost. I wondered for an instant what sort of tool it was, and where it might be now. Then my attention turned to the last of the objects, the orb of fire. The orange sphere glowed like a radiant torch, or, as Dagda had said, like a radiant spirit. "The treasures," I said aloud, unable to turn away from them. Rhea, who had silently joined me, took my arm.
"Ixtma told me the Grondalusa brought them here, not long before we arrived."
Hearing the squirrel chatter angrily, she grinned.
"He reminds me that she only brought them to the clearing outside Albassa, since she was far too big to carry them inside herself. She asked, commanded Ixtma and his family to do the rest."
Perplexed, I ran my finger over the harp's oaken sound box. Dagda must have sent the Grandalusa a message, as he did Shim. But why? The treasures were safe enough where they were, in her crystal cave. She had agreed to guard them for all time. Not for all time. Only until she could find someone wise enough to choose the right guardians to take care of them. The treasures, before Stangmar, belonged to all Finkairans. The Grandalusa believes it should be that way again, and I agree. More confused than ever, I shook my head. But who is wise enough to choose the guardians? Surely the Grandalusa herself could do that better than anyone else. Rhea observed me thoughtfully. That's not what she thinks. You don't mean... Yes, Merlin. She wants you to do it. As she told Ixtma, the Isle of Finkaira holds a wizard once more. I swallowed, glancing again at the objects stacked by the wall. Each of them, regardless of shape or size or materials, possessed a magic that could enrich all the inhabitants of Finkaira. Rhea grinned at me. So what are you going to do? I really don't know. You must have some ideas. Bending down to the floor, I retrieved my staff. A wizard's staff. Well, I think the Caller of Dreams should go to Clip3, wisest of the bards. I indicated Bumblebee, still stuffing himself with nuts and honey. And I think a certain humorless jester deserves the honor of delivering it to him. Her grin broadened into a smile. Warming to my task, I grasped the handle of the plough that tills its own field. I'm not sure yet about most of the wise tools, but this plough is different. I know a man named Horn who will use it well, and share it gladly. Then I bent to retrieve the glowing orb of fire. I hefted it, feeling its pulsing warmth. Without a word, I handed it to Rhea, whose leafy garb danced with the orange light. Surprise filled her face. For me? For you. She started to protest, but I spoke first. Remember what Dagda told us? The orb of fire can rekindle hope, joy, and even the will to live. It belongs in the care of someone whose spirit shines as bright as it does. Her eyes glistened as she studied the sphere. You've given me something even more precious than this. For a long moment we held each other's gaze. At last she pointed to the flowering harp. Now what about that? I grinned. I think it ought to go to two people with a garden. A garden that flourished even in the middle of the rusted plains when everything around it lay dying. Telian and Garlotha. I nodded. And this time, when I carry the harp to their home, I'll expect nothing more than to be welcomed as their friend. Again I touched the oaken sound box. First, though, I will take the harp myself for a while. I have some unfinished work to do in the dark hills. As she lifted her gaze to our boss's arching boughs, Rhea's face glowed. Well, as it happens, so do I. Really? I raised an eyebrow. What work do you have there? Guiding. I have a brother, you see, who gets lost easily. This is Kevin Isola. We hope you have enjoyed this unabridged production of The 7 Songs of Merlin, Book 2 of The Lost Years of Merlin by T.A. Barron. This program was produced and directed by Taro Meyer. Executive producer, Jacob Braunstein. Text copyright 1997 by Thomas Archibald Barron. Production copyright 2002, Random House Inc. All rights reserved.